Guys, this video will have two different voices, but I hope you like it. Thanks for the support, and without further ado, let's get into the video.
This story is about a lone adventurer who broke a taboo. This adventurer was eating like an animal. Several monsters were lying on the ground, and a young man was atop them. His arm was completely injured. He stopped eating, and a light began to envelop his body. Quickly, all the wounds on his body began to heal. The system notified him that some abilities had been acquired, such as Roar and Battle Axe. The protagonist started shouting as a strong aura took over the place. Several other creatures were nearby, watching everything unfold. A noble's diary stated, "Devouring monsters is a taboo in this world." The monsters began to surround the young man. They started attacking. For a human, devouring monsters meant absorbing their evil essences. The first symptom appeared upon absorbing it, an indescribable feeling of frenzy, accompanied by superhuman strength. The second symptom was severe headaches and nausea, followed by poisoning. The monsters kept appearing, but the young man showed no fear. The third symptom is a sudden death. While the monsters attacked him, the protagonist only thought about getting revenge on everything. Rage overtook his eyes and emotions. If one could endure all of this, they might become a monster after consuming the evil essence. The young man began defeating all the creatures as if they were nothing. He kept striking, fighting, and devouring everything that moved around him, gaining more and more abilities. This cycle repeated many times. After defeating everything in his path, the protagonist reached a large serpent. Fueled by rage and armed with many acquired abilities, he began a fierce battle with the serpent. It tried to bite him, but he was able to defend himself, and quickly used his lightning skill called Thunder Mantle. A huge electrical shock hit the serpent, which couldn't withstand such a powerful blow. The boy gained another ability called Poison Mist. He continued to defeat and devour the monsters, growing stronger and stronger. Tired of the constant fighting, he stopped for a moment, thinking that perhaps with all of this, he might survive. However, he heard another sound, and when he looked up, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Several other creatures appeared before him. This time, he was surrounded by many monsters. He looked at all of them and said that no matter how many he had to defeat, he would survive, no matter the cost. This is the future of the protagonist, the monster-devouring adventurer. Currently, in Bologna, a border city with multiple dungeons, there is one called the Miasma Dungeon. The air inside this dungeon continuously degrades the stats of the adventurers who visit it. The protagonist was walking through it, thinking that other people hated that place, but he always visited it. Before he knew it, he was already being called the Miasma Butcher. He looked at the ground and was pleased to see there was plenty of grass. That was the 6th floor of the dungeon. He starts harvesting them. These are the miasma grasses. They have the effect of purifying the dungeon and are also a source of money for the protagonist. He starts picking a few, thinking he wouldn't gather much, just what he needed. After harvesting them, he leaves happily, thinking they would last him for about 3 days. Suddenly, he hears some noises and turns around, seeing a group of rats. He thinks they are the dungeon's rats. The young man starts running toward the rats. Many of the monsters here use poison as an attack, which contributes to why adventurers dislike this place. However, for him, it didn't make a difference. The protagonist crosses the poison curtain, jumping straight into the rats. He easily takes down all the rats present, but more rats appear out of nowhere, jumping toward the boy. He doesn't waste time in counterattacks, defeating another rat. However, another one was already too close, and he can only defend himself with his arm as the rat tries to bite him. The rat was getting closer to injuring the protagonist, but at the last second, he hears someone shouting. A fireball hits the rat, throwing the boy to the side. He falls to the ground, looking at the explosion, surprised by everything. As he looks to the side, he sees a few people saying they missed. An adventurer tells the younger one that he had told him to get closer before firing the attack. The protagonist isn't so pleased to see the familiar faces from the Adventurer Guild. One of the young men approaches the protagonist and apologizes, asking if his name is Rude, emphasizing that he only tried to help since it looked like Rude was in danger. Rude gets up and thanks him, asking the young man to warn him before doing something like that again. The boy is confused and says that's exactly what he did when he shouted fireball. While they were talking, the chubby one shouted, saying that the grass colony was really there. He smiles, saying it's a stroke of luck. The other two are happy to hear that, but the protagonist is shocked. He asks if the 3 of them had been following him to find his gathering point. The boy asks what he's talking about, as they are just adventurers trying to make a living in a dungeon. He points out that it was a coincidence that they ran into him and then saved him. They shout that this was expected of the Miasma Butcher. He can't just thank them. The 3 start preparing for a fight. Rude notices this and closes his eyes. Even though he's irritated, He begins to apologize for doubting them and thanks them for saving him. His hand trembles with rage. Sometime later, in Bologna, at Rude's base, the restaurant Full Belly, the protagonist is being thrown onto the tables. Two men are cursing at him, saying that whenever he enters, the smell ruins the food and that they had to say this because he was too dumb to notice. Rude is on the ground, and the two continue mocking him. The blonde man says that adventurers are people with the skills to defeat monsters. They start laughing while claiming that a person with such a useless skill, like abnormal status nullification, is good for nothing. The protagonist looks at them with disgust for everything they said. Abnormal status nullification is Rude's unique ability. It's useful for exploring the miasma dungeon, but it's not suitable for defeating monsters, which is vital for any adventurer. And since he has no combat skills, Rude is not accepted in any group. Because of this, he earned the nickname Miasma Butcher, as he is always on the lower floors, searching for items. Rude leaves the restaurant because, thanks to this weak ability, he has become a renegade adventurer. The protagonist thinks that, even though he's already a grown man, he still has life or death battles with mere rats. Lying in his bed, lost in thought, he wonders if he will really spend his whole life being just the Miasma Butcher. The next day, at the Adventurer Guild, Rude opens the door, thinking that he needs to find another colony while he still has some money left. As he walks through the place, the protagonist notices that it's noisier than usual. He goes up to the receptionist and asks if there are any good requests for today. With a discouraged look, she tells him that a new dungeon has been discovered. Rude is a bit shocked by this news, because new dungeons are filled with treasures and magical items. It's a golden opportunity for any adventurer. He looks around and thinks that now it makes sense why there are so many people here. The guild receptionist calls him over and shows him that the herbs he used to bring in now only fetch 30 because the price has dropped. He looks at it and shouts at her, asking why. She explains that the miasma dungeon was never popular, and now that people are focused on the new dungeon, there won't be any demand for those herbs. The protagonist can't believe it. The girl also says that the new dungeon is located in the Avelio Mountains, but Rude isn't allowed to go there. He asks why. She shows him that the requirement to enter is rank D or higher, and since Rude-chan is rank E, he doesn't qualify. This frustrates him. He yells at her, saying he wants to at least take a look at the dungeon, asking if there's nothing he can do. The girl sighs and says that unfortunately, those are the rules, adding that even if he went there, he would only meet his end. Even so, Rude is upset by this. Suddenly, someone arrives and says that if he wants to go that badly, he could join the group as a porter. The boy looks at him with a smile on his face. After everything is settled, they take a carriage that leads them down a road. The group leader smiles and says that it's great to have found the protagonist, as he had been looking for someone to carry the dungeon items, but no one wanted to. Rude looks at him disheartened, thinking that this is because all the adventurers in the guild are gathering to see the new dungeon, making it hard to find a porter. Suddenly, the redhead starts questioning if it really had to be the butcher. The man agrees with her, asking if there was no one better. The leader tells everyone to stop it, saying that the protagonist is a veteran adventurer, and it's better to take him than a beginner. He begins to introduce himself, saying his name is Bayer, and that he is the leader of the Scarlet Blades. Bayer also introduces the other two, saying they are Sasha and Rick. Together, the three of them form a rank D group. The protagonist looks at them and also introduces himself, saying his name is Rude, rank E. He says it's a pleasure to work with everyone there. Bayer says that before they enter, he would like to take a closer look at the protagonist's stats and asks him to show his guild card. Rude says it's no problem. As soon as he takes the card, Bayer asks him to open his status, and a window showing his specifications appears. Bayer is surprised and asks if Rude can use fire magic. Rude says yes, but it's too weak to be used in battle, though it's good enough for cooking. Bayer smiles, saying that's quite useful, and that's why they'll rely on him. After the trip, they arrive at the dungeon and are impressed. The leader says they've finally arrived. This is the new Avelio dungeon. Sasha is very happy, and Rick is excited. She says that it looks like they were the first ones to get here. Rick can barely wait and asks them to go explore right away. Slowly, they open the door and begin to look around. However, as soon as they look, they see several people inside. In front, there were people. To the right, there were people. To the left, there were people. Everywhere they looked, there were more and more people. Sasha shouts that there are adventurers everywhere. Bayer looks at all of this and says that it seems like the first floor has already been explored. Sasha continues, irritated, saying that they didn't get here first after all. Rick says it's easy to fix. They just need to go a bit deeper since there should be fewer people down there. She gets excited, saying he's right. Rude says it's not a good idea, since this is a newly discovered dungeon, and they should first map out the first floor. However, they look at him, and she asks if she heard the porter giving his opinion. Rick says that's why he's still rank E. Bayer tells them both to stop, stressing that the protagonist didn't say that with bad intentions. He says that, even so, he agrees with the others, because if things keep going like this, they won't get good results. They look at the descent, saying they need to move quickly. With that, they start descending and reach the 4th floor. A wolf charges at them, and the protagonist gets scared. However, Rick steps in and defeats the wolf. He turns to the protagonist and tells him to stop being scared of those small fry. Sasha doesn't show mercy and uses her magic to defeat those creatures. Bayer defeats everything that approaches him. Rude watches the 3 of them, impressed by their strength. He tries to grab his sword but can barely move due to fear. Before he could do anything, all the monsters had already been defeated. The leader puts his sword away and breathes a sigh of relief. Sasha is happy with the rewards, saying that they were right to go deeper, as it's great without the others around. Bayer looks at his ring and says that the monsters here aren't very strong, but they still manage to find some good treasures. Suddenly, Rick shouts at the protagonist, telling him to collect the materials from the monsters he defeated too. Rude says that there's no way he can collect materials from those monsters because they are too damaged, including their magic stones. Rick asks how he knows that if he hasn't looked and tells Rude to stop being a butcher and lazy. The protagonist gets irritated, remembering how Rick had been acting, and even with his hand trembling from anger, he says he'll collect them. Rude goes over to one of the monsters, thinking that it was badly damaged and smelled awful. He wonders if Rick really needed to go this far. The protagonist uses his fire magic and starts thinking if it would be easier if he just burned a little. Rick continues mocking him, saying that Rude started roasting the monster, asking if he was going to eat it. Suddenly, he says they've been exploring for a long time, and he's starving. The monsters actually look pretty good. Sasha tells him to stop because it's disgusting. She points out that it's a taboo for adventurers to eat monsters, as they would absorb their mana, and no one knows what could happen. Rick says it was just a joke, and that he's going to eat a lot with the money they've earned. Suddenly, a pressure, accompanied by a loud noise, fills the area, leaving everyone there frightened. Right in front of the 4 of them, a huge monster appears. It's a minotaur. Rude gets worried because it's a rank B monster, and it shouldn't be in this layer. They start shouting that they won't be able to defeat it and ask what they should do. Bayer shouts at the protagonist that he's going to use the items and asks for the bag. He grabs the bag and tells Rude to keep an eye on the monster's movements. The protagonist asks if the leader has a plan. Bayer starts laughing and says yes, preparing to attack. He emphasizes that he has a great plan. Bayer betrays the protagonist and strikes him. While Rude is lying on the ground, the leader calls the other 2. Rick throws a spear called the Warrior's Mantle. This is a warrior's encouragement ability that makes the target attract the monster's attention. The spear lands beside the protagonist. Sasha uses acceleration on everyone. This is an ability that doubles the target's speed. Almost powerless, lying on the ground, Rude asks if they were planning to do this from the start. The leader, smiling, asks if there was any other reason they brought a butcher with them. The protagonist looks at them as they run and shout at him to buy time. Filled with rage, he screams, cursing at all of them. The minotaur prepares to attack him. The protagonist looks at it, and the monster looks back. With full force, it attacks and throws Rude away. He crashes into the wall and smiles, thinking that he managed to dodge. However, he sees the monster approaching him and thinks it's the end. The minotaur hits him with all its strength, making him feel incomparable pain. The wall behind him cracks with the force of the blow, and both of them fly through the other side of the wall. The monster also gets worried when it sees that both of them are falling into a giant hole. After the fall, Rude opens his eyes, all battered. Confused, he wonders if he's still alive. He looks to the side and sees that he fell on top of the monster. The protagonist thinks that, even so, he doesn't have much time, because even if no monsters appear, he's too injured to get out of there. Hunger begins to take over his body. He needs to eat something. Still on top of the minotaur, he becomes lost in thought and swallows, saliva filling his mouth. He starts laughing, wondering what he's thinking, as eating monsters could only end badly. Rude closes his eyes, thinking about how terrible his life has been. But then, he begins to see a light and a person speaking to him. The person says that no matter how hard life gets, he should never give up. Without hesitation, he begins to eat the monster, piece by piece. He thinks that if a human without magic eats monster meat rich in magic, the monster's particles will invade his body. Monsterfication. The protagonist thinks this is a terrible fate, worse than dying from poisoning. His eyes start to change color, and a dense aura begins to take over his body. But he doesn't stop. He keeps cutting the monster's flesh. His arm is completely destroyed. That's why it's a taboo. To recover from his wounds and quell his hunger, Rude took a risky bet that resulted in an unexpected mutation. In the dungeon's corridors, a noise is heard. The sleeping monsters begin to wake up and see something terrifying moving among them. Something that shouldn't be there. Rude is walking like a ghost. His eyes are glowing, and his rage has overtaken his body. The bats try to attack him, but he uses the roar ability, intimidating the opponents with a loud roar. The bats don't stand a chance. However, more appear. This time, the protagonist uses physical reinforcement, a skill that temporarily enhances the user's physical strength. He starts pulverizing everything that gets close. Driven by rage and hunger, he defeats all the monsters and keeps eating each one. Now, Rude has the echolocation ability. With this, he detects creatures nearby, and it's effective in the dark. Several other monsters of all types start approaching. However, now the protagonist can hear and locate all of them. He's amazed when he realizes they're coming in hordes. This excites Rude, making him eager to see who will eat whom. The protagonist charges at the monsters, defeating everything near him. He grips his axe tightly, thinking that it fits perfectly in his hand, and now he can sense monsters without using magic. Rude continues this relentless battle, and everything he can eat, he devours without hesitation. After the fight, the protagonist is panting and begins to laugh. His clothes and injuries start healing immediately. He thinks that every time he eats a monster, he feels power coursing through his body. Thirsty for more power, he continues his hunt, destroying any monster that crosses his path, all while grinning. After a long time of fighting and walking, he opens the door and begins to leave. Seeing the ray of sunlight, he freezes and drops his axe on the ground, smiling because he's finally made it back. Rude yells, happy that he managed to survive. Meanwhile, at the Adventurers Guild, people are talking anxiously to one another. The Scarlet Blades group is giving their report. An old man says that after hearing their report, he decided to gather all the adventurers who were in the dungeon, except for Rude, who was with the 3 others. This man is the master of the Bologna Guild, and his name is Lankars. Bayer pretends to be sad and says that as soon as they found a minotaur on the 4th floor, Rude was attacked before they could do anything. Sasha also puts on a show and pretends to cry, saying that if they had just seen the monster before, Lankars says he understands the situation. He then declares that, from now on, entry into that dungeon is forbidden. The receptionist girl is saddened, but then she is surprised by what she sees before her eyes. The protagonist opens the door, leaving everyone there shocked. People begin to question what happened. The 3 members of the Scarlet Blades and the Guildmaster are completely stunned. Bayer runs out, shouting for Rude, happy that he's alive. However, he goes up to the protagonist's ear and says that if he opens his mouth, he won't be so lucky to stay alive. The others reach him, asking if he's okay and saying they tried to return to help, but the dungeon was closed. They touch the protagonist, but he remains silent. Bayer yells that it doesn't matter how, only that Rude is fine, and this deserves a celebration. But it can't be here. Bayer tries to push the protagonist, but is surprised when he realizes he can't move. Rude yells that the 3 of them used him as bait. This shocks everyone. Bayer tries to deflect the situation, asking what he's talking about. The Guildmaster asks what the protagonist meant by bait. Rude begins to explain that Bayer stole the supplies and attacked him from behind. Rick used a skill to direct the Minotaur toward the protagonist, while Sasha accelerated them to flee, leaving him behind. Bayer screams, trying to deny it. Suddenly, a woman begins to enter the guild, saying that they will clarify the story. Everyone looks at her entering the building, as she is an official from the Truth Department. The 3 are shocked and ask what an official from the Truth is doing here. Lankar says it's because there have been numerous porters who joined their team and were never seen again. That's why he brought her in to settle the debt. The Guildmaster tells her to proceed, and everyone is scared, except for the protagonist. She asks between Bayer's group and Rude's group who is telling the truth. Her eyes begin to glow, and seconds later she declares that the members of the Scarlet Blades are lying. The woman raises her staff and announces that Rude is telling the truth. Bayer is terrified by this. The other adventurers start whispering to each other, displeased. Despite all this, Bayer refuses to accept it and asks how they knew that. Lankars explains that the truth ability is impossible to acquire after reaching adulthood, and its effectiveness rivals unique abilities. The lies didn't pass the truth ability. The Guildmaster asks what could be more reliable than the words of someone who swore to dedicate all their power to the nation. Bayer is left speechless, trembling in fear. Lankars shouts that abandoning comrades is a taboo for adventurers. Moreover, the 3 of them injured their companion and used him as bait to escape. Lankars says that, even without investigating the other crimes, this is enough to revoke the 3 of their adventurer licenses and reduce them to servants. Sasha begins to shout, outraged by this. Rick can't believe it. Bayer begins to tremble with anger, never imagining that someone like him would end up as a mere servant. He looks at the young woman beside him, irritated, thinking that if it weren't for them, filled with rage, he attacks the girl. The master and the protagonist see this. The young woman is startled. Without thinking twice, Rude moves quickly and steps in front of the girl, defending her from the attack. The protagonist looks directly at Bayer and tells him never to dare touch a truth official again. Bayer is shocked by the protagonist's strength and speed. Rude lands a blow on him, sending him flying several meters away. Bayer crashes into the wall with such force that it bursts, drawing the attention of everyone passing by. Sasha and Rick are frozen in fear upon seeing this. Rude says that was not cool. Once everything settles down, Lankars takes the protagonist to the guest room and apologizes for the inconvenience, saying that he must be tired. Rude says it's fine and asks what happened to the three. Lankars explains that the three were caught by his team and will now be interrogated. If it's confirmed that they are repeat offenders who used porters as bait, they will lose everything and be reduced to servants. However, Bayer went too far by trying to attack a truth official, and it's likely that he'll never be seen again. The protagonist is shocked by this. Lankars points out that the three lost their rights to the profits they made in the dungeon, so Rude will get everything. The master says there's about 200,000 Regan inside. After they finish talking, the protagonist leaves the room and stands in front of the door, holding all the money in his hands. Rude embraces the money, happy, thinking that this will cover some of his expenses. He thinks it would take a long time to gather that much, even if he collected a little every day. Rude never imagined he could make so much money as an adventurer. He begins to walk and notices something strange. The protagonist thinks everyone stopped insulting him because they saw what happened earlier, but that doesn't mean they'll be kind. He keeps walking, thinking that if he keeps evolving this way, people will start to suspect him. So, he decides to try his luck in the miasma once again, like before. The protagonist takes a deep breath and thinks it's time to act and stop being negative, as he finally has some good money and will be able to buy equipment and eat whatever he wants. While walking through the village, he decided to take a look at the tool shop. Suddenly, Rude was impressed by something. A beautiful magic bag caught his attention. He continued walking, saying he would look for something to eat. The next day, inside the dungeon, the monsters were being defeated easily. Rude never imagined he would be able to defeat them so effortlessly, since just yesterday, he would have been fleeing. The protagonist used his analysis skill, and his eyes started to glow as he saw the rat's stats in detail. Rude realized that this skill was something he gained after eating the monster. He kept observing the rats, thinking they were only level 9, which made him wonder how much his own stats had increased. He pulled out his guild card. Since he defeated the rats so easily, he thought he should be at level 20. When he opened his status window, the protagonist was shocked to see that his current level was 42, considering that just yesterday, he was at level 7. Rude commented that this was rare and decided to check his skills. When he opened his status window again, he was pleased to see that he had several new skills. He remembered that, when passing by the place where he fell in the dungeon, the wall was already sealed. The new dungeon would be sealed for a while, so Rude decided to explore the miasma. Confident, he wanted to test his new skills on deeper floors. Also, he wanted to test the new bag he had bought earlier. Rude went to the staircase, saying he wanted to choose the right monster to test his skills. He started going down, passing the 6th floor, the 9th floor, and the 13th floor. However, he found all of it uninteresting and thought he needed to go deeper. After a while, the protagonist reached the 24th floor where he encountered a monster with armor and a sword. Rude hid behind a stone and used his skill to analyze, seeing that the monster was only level 25. The protagonist commented that the lizard soldiers fight in groups, but there was only one here. He looked at the sword, smiled, and said it might be worth trying. Rude attacked, and the lizard noticed his movements. It tried to dodge, but the protagonist's attack still grazed it. Rude smiled and said that wasn't bad, but he wouldn't miss the next one. The lizard ran away, leaving the protagonist confused. Rude chased after it, shouting for it to wait. He was a little confused because the monster ran into an alley. The protagonist approached, saying that it wouldn't escape now. The lizard turned around, smiling, and stared at the protagonist. Rude noticed other presences behind him. He slowly turned around and found 2 more lizards. Soon, the protagonist realized it was a trap. He kept his eyes on the lizards and prepared for the fight, thinking he was completely surrounded. Even with the level difference, the situation still seemed bad. One of the lizards attacked, but Rude dodged, thinking that, in this case, he would take them down one by one. He quickly advanced and attacked one of the lizards, shouting that it was time to have some fun. His strength was great, and he managed to knock down the lizard, which simply stared at the next attack. Rude prepared himself, thinking that he would finish this now. However, another lizard stepped in front to protect its companion. The protagonist was confused by this behavior. He realized that the other was attacking him from behind and managed to dodge at the last second. The lizard watched him while Rude smiled and said that it was close. Several more lizards started to appear, making the protagonist wonder how many were left. Rude thought, even if they worked well together, how did they manage to set up this ambush and coordinate their attacks so well? Thinking a little more, he remembered that before they acted, he had heard a sharp sound that could only mean one thing. Looking back, the protagonist was able to see the leader coordinating all the attacks of the lizards. Quickly, he used his analysis skill and focused directly on the boss. Its level was higher than the others, and one of its skills was command. Rude started laughing, thinking he had finally found the one calling the shots. The boss noticed he had been spotted and began to shout. The other lizards also started shouting, and 3 of them attacked at the same time. Rude used physical reinforcement and gathered his strength to counterattack. He defeated everyone in his way. A lizard stepped in front of him, but the protagonist ignored it and simply stepped over it. He jumped over all the lizards, heading straight for the leader. The boss stood watching as the protagonist charged, thinking he had finally caught him. Rude landed a full strike, but was surprised by what happened. The leader didn't have a single scratch. The boss realized that the protagonist had let his guard down, grabbed his sword, and charged at him. Rude thought he wouldn't be able to dodge the attack, but when the boss's strike hit, nothing happened because he had activated his iron body skill. The protagonist laughed and told the boss that he wasn't the only one with an ace up his sleeve. The leader backed off, and Rude took the opportunity to assess the situation, confused by what had happened since he thought he had hit the boss but hadn't caused any damage. After analyzing, Rude confirmed that the leader didn't have resistance skills, so it must have been another lizard. He checked all the others around him, but couldn't find any special skills. Suddenly, he found it. One of the lizards had a wound, and one of its abilities was substitution. Rude thought that this was the lizard taking all the damage. The lizard realized it had been noticed, but it was too late. Rude managed to strike it. The protagonist remarked that it must be tough being a subordinate who only serves to take damage. The lizard began to tremble and fell to the ground. As it hit the ground, Rude told them not to take it personally. The boss, seeing this, became furious and started shouting. All the lizards attacked at once, but the protagonist used his web manipulation skill and managed to avoid all the attacks. The leader watched in disbelief at what he was seeing. From above, Rude said that by grouping together, they had made it easier for him to use his webs, and he created a net, throwing it toward them. The boss just watched it, without reacting. All the lizards were defeated, including the leader. The protagonist approached and said, "Looks like I won," and with a firm strike, finished the battle. The leader was defeated, and consequently, all the others were as well. The protagonist stopped in the middle of them and said, "Now it's time for a snack." Rude took out his bag, saying it was time to use the magic bag. The space inside expanded magically, and the weight was completely reduced when he closed it. He began searching inside the bag, looking for kitchen items. Rude pulled out a pot, a cutting board, and some seasonings. As he prepared the meal, he thought about how he used to be desperate to survive, but had always wanted to try these things. The protagonist began cooking, wondering if monster meat. After it was ready, he looked at the dish, salivating, thinking that cooking and then eating it would be a great experience. With a strong desire to taste it, he grabbed a piece and started eating. Rude was amazed by the flavor. It was delicious. He kept eating, not expecting it to be this good. While eating, the protagonist realized he had gained new skills. He wondered why it tasted so good, and if it was because of the magical particles. The Minotaur's skills, the spider armor, and the evil eye had been very useful. However, there were still other abilities he hadn't tested, like the lightning wolf's skill and the black serpent's poison. Once he finished eating, Rude stood up excited, thinking that on his way back, he'd eat more. He looked to the side and saw the lizard with the substitution ability still there. Sometime later, on the 21st floor, other types of monsters appeared. The protagonist began his attack with the lightning mantle skill, defeating them all at once. The monsters fell to the ground, and he thought that skill was also great. Rude commented that those monsters inflicted abnormal statuses, but they picked the wrong opponent. The protagonist smiled and grabbed his pot, saying that today he would have frog meat with insects. He made charan fried. While eating, he thought that the frog meat was as tender as a mushroom. New skills were acquired. Suddenly, he heard a noise. The protagonist wondered what it was, as it sounded like a knock and human voices. He was glad to know that there were adventurers who had made it this far. Rude begins to gather his things and thanks the monsters for the meal he had. He runs off, thinking that it's hard to see other groups in combat, but maybe he could gather some information. His sword was dirty, and a girl was injured on the ground, lying before several men. She was in pain from her wounds. One of the men says the attack hurt because he hadn't expected the young woman to have so much magic left. The leader approaches and says that the trouble she caused will be worth it. He reaches up and removes his hood, revealing that she's an elf. The girl, frightened, can't say a word. The men start laughing, wondering how much she's worth. Suddenly, Rude appears, saying he had hoped to find some friendly adventurers. The leader and the others look back, surprised. The protagonist walks toward them, saying he doesn't know what's going on, but he can't just stand by while a lady is being attacked. The leader asks who he is. Rude smiles and says he's just an adventurer, thinking he's rank E. The elf screams for him to leave, warning that those men are adventurer hunters. Rude thinks he's heard of them before. He knows they're all high level, and uses his eye to analyze them. However, he can only see their levels, as their stats are hidden. This is the case for everyone. Rude is surprised, wondering if they have some kind of cloaking ability or magical item. The leader orders the others to capture Rude, and the drunk man charges at him. Rude is impressed by the man's speed but still manages to defend himself. The man says he wasn't bad. Rude smiles and replies that, actually, it's the drunk who's weak. This enrages the man, and he shouts that he's not weak. The others watch the fight between the two. When the blonde lowers his guard, Rude uses his poison skill, hitting the drunk's face. The man screams in pain. The others look at Zarius, who's collapsed on the ground, and ask if Rude spat poison at him. The group looks at Rude, thinking he's a monster. Rude reflects that this is a careless way of fighting, and that it's not how an adventurer should act, but it's the only way he knows how to fight. The leader watches the scene, wondering if that's really a poison skill. They can't underestimate him. He orders the other two to advance together. The two attack first, and Rude manages to dodge the first strike, thinking that if he pauses for even a second, it would be the end. The man with long hair attacks next, but Rude dodges again. Suddenly, he notices a foot coming toward him. The leader is in front, ready to strike. With no time to dodge, he activates his iron body skill. The captain lands a kick, sending Rude crashing into a green slime. The captain thinks that Rude must be incredibly resilient. Rude begins to get up, and the blonde man says he'll put an end to this. The protagonist stands up and starts running toward the slime puddle, but the man shouts at him to stop running. Rude begins to enter the slime, and the leader tells him to stop, explaining that it's a poisonous swamp, and if he goes deeper, he won't make it out alive. Rude continues advancing, while the leader says that he won't be able to resist and will soon turn back. The protagonist looks at them and wonders how long they'll stay there because, it seems, he'll have to fight seriously. He says that he's lucky to have fallen into the swamp because, in addition to the miasma, the swamp vapor will degrade the stats of the three. They start feeling the effect, and the long-haired man asks how long Rude plans to stay in the swamp. The masked man replies that 10 minutes have passed and that he's not doing well. Rude thinks it's time to act. He wanted to weaken them more, but if he waited any longer, it would only cause more suffering to the injured elf. Rude approaches and says that the effects of the poison and miasma can be harsh. The two ask if he's giving up, since he's caused so much trouble. Rude replies that, unfortunately, he's immune to abnormal statuses, so he doesn't know what they're feeling. The captain gets angry, realizing he's been deceived. Filled with rage, he shouts for his men to grab the protagonist immediately. The masked man looks at Rude and charges without hesitation, but the protagonist easily blocks the attack. The man starts to grow weaker. Rude says that the poison drains stamina and the miasma lowers stats. Suddenly, Rude notices the other man attacking from the side. He activates his iron body skill, and the attack causes no damage at all. The long-haired man is confused by this. Taking advantage of the fact that both are close to him, Rude uses his lightning mantle skill. A powerful electric shock hits both of them at once. Both the masked man and the long-haired one are injured, but they don't give up and shout curses at Rude. But Rude activates his air slash skill, and several wind blades strike the bandits. The leader watches everything unfold, thinking to himself that Rude has poison, iron body, lightning mantle, and even air slash. He asks why a human has so many monster-like abilities. Rude advances, saying it doesn't matter. The two engage in an intense battle. The captain thinks to himself that, despite being superior in close combat, he's starting to lose the fight, probably due to the miasma. Rude keeps advancing and attacking. With no other option, the captain uses his agility boost, saying he had to use it against trash like this. He attacks with everything he's got. Rude fixes his gaze on the captain and activates his physical boost, breaking the leader's sword and winning the hard-fought battle. The protagonist says that, if it weren't for the abnormal statuses, the captain would have been much stronger than him. After the fight, the two start walking. The elf thanks him for saving her, saying she doesn't know what would have happened if he hadn't shown up. Rude says he couldn't leave her in that situation. He thinks to himself that the elf is trying to keep her composure, but her body is clearly affected by the miasma. He says he did what he could to give her first aid. He starts thinking that it's rare to see an elf in such a remote area and wonders why she was being hunted by those men. Suddenly, they hear a loud noise. A huge monster appears before them. Rude thinks that it must be the leader of the moths and uses his eye to analyze it. He sees that the monster is level 37. Without thinking twice, he jumps to attack, believing the monster wouldn't be able to defeat him. However, the monster uses its ability, and there's no time for Rude to react. The attack is ferocious, splitting the ground and almost hitting the elf, who narrowly dodges. Rude asks if she's okay, and the elf responds that she is. He prepares himself, saying that he was caught off guard but now he'll have to repay it. The moth starts to fly, and Rude asks if she really thinks flying away will save her. He uses his air slash skill, hitting the monster directly. The monster is heavily wounded, which makes it even angrier. It uses its paralyzing scales, but Rude smiles and says that doesn't work on him. However, he notices that the attack is also heading toward the elf. She focuses and unleashes a powerful gust of wind, leaving the monster almost defeated. Rude is impressed, but this is to be expected from an elf. He goes up to the monster and finishes it off. The elf looks at him and asks if he's really immune to poison and paralysis. She also says that his skills are similar to those of monsters. Rude wonders how to explain that, but the elf suddenly starts feeling unwell and collapses to her knees. Rude becomes concerned and shouts, asking if she was hit by the paralyzing scales. With heavy breathing, the elf says it's something else. He kneels beside her, and she says that once they get out of there, she'll explain everything. They start moving toward the exit, and once outside, they sit under a tree. The elf smiles in relief, saying she feels much better now that she's out of the labyrinth. Before telling him everything, she decides to introduce herself, saying she's an ex-adventurer named Alicia. Rude is surprised and exclaims, asking if she's the Alicia from the Emerald Storm. She smiles, saying that he already knows her. The protagonist says that she's from the most renowned S-rank group, Azure Trails. Everyone knows the members of that group, but as far as he remembers, the group was... Alicia lowers her head and confirms, saying it's been 5 years. They were defeated by monsters that day. They faced a monster deep within an S-rank dungeon called the Abyss Dungeon. During that battle, they lost their leader, and another member had to retire due to the severity of their injuries. One more was devoured by the labyrinth. The elf says that even she didn't come out unscathed. She starts to show a little more of her scars. Rude is startled and asks what she's doing. She explains that the mark is a curse that was placed on her that day, the low-level curse. The protagonist is surprised, saying he's never heard of it. Alicia says she hadn't known about it either. She explains that she tried everything but could only slow the curse's progression. Those hunters found out about the curse and tried to exploit it for profit. Alicia explains that, in any case, she would meet her end once her level reached 0. Even knowing that, she couldn't bear the idea of surrendering to those scum. Rude listens carefully and suddenly notices something. He says that maybe he can help her with that. Rude thinks about his substitution skill, which allows him to swap places with someone and take all the damage and negative effects. He says he wants to try something. The protagonist asks if she would accept the skill he's about to activate, which confuses the elf. However, she eventually agrees. The two stand up, and he touches her shoulder, activating his substitution skill. Suddenly, the curse mark begins to pass through Rude's arm, leaving Alicia stunned. She wonders if the curse is really going to him. Alicia realizes that it is, and screams for him to stop, saying that if he keeps going, he'll be affected by the curse. With a smile on his face, Rude says it's fine, and asks her to trust him. A dense aura forms behind the protagonist, taking the shape of a monster. Alicia watches in fear. The curse is entering his body. As soon as Rude absorbs all of the curse, his unique skill activates, nullification of abnormal statuses. A bright light fills the area, and the curse begins to be completely destroyed. Rude looks at his hand, thinking that it seems to have worked. The elf, still confused, asks what that was, but the protagonist simply tells her to check her guild card. When she looks at it, her status is normal. The curse has truly been destroyed. She can't believe the curse has been broken. Rude says that his unique ability is the nullification of abnormal statuses. He thought that by taking the curse upon himself, he could destroy it. Alicia asks if he's an idiot, as he shouldn't be taking such risks for a complete stranger. With tears in her eyes, she smiles in relief and thanks him for saving her life. Rude looks at her and tries to comfort her, saying that he'll always help those in need. Later that day, she was drinking glass after glass, completely happy. Alicia says that the protagonist really knows how to pick a place, as the food is cheap and the beer is delicious. He thinks it's even better that they kicked him out. Rude asks if she'll be okay drinking so much. Alicia yells, asking for another drink. The protagonist reminds her that just a few hours ago, she was severely injured. She smiles, saying that she's ready for more and that today is great. Alicia cheers with him, asking why she wouldn't drink. The protagonist asks what her plans are now. She says that she'd like to get to know him a little better, leaving him surprised. Alicia stares at him and asks why he decided to become an adventurer. He tells her that, some time ago, the village he lived in was attacked by monsters. Those monsters destroyed everyone he loved. Friends, family. They took everything from him. While Rude was crying over his mother's body, someone arrived, thanks to an S-rank adventurer who stepped in to protect him from the monsters. Everything changed. The protagonist stared at that person, who smiled back, showing a confidence he had never seen before. The adventurer began fighting the monsters, and thanks to that, Rude survived. Those memories would never be forgotten. Since then, Rude had wished to become an S-rank adventurer, to save others. That was the reason he chose this path. The elf is happy, saying it's a good goal. He asks if she's going to laugh now. Alicia smiles and says that she also dreamed of reaching S-rank. Besides that, she had always been fighting to become stronger, before she was cursed. Alicia says she's sure that she still has companions trapped in the abyss, and for that reason, no matter what happens, she'll challenge that monster again. The protagonist is impressed. She says that, for now, until they get strong enough to achieve their goals, they could form a group. Rude becomes a bit worried about this and tries to say something, but the two idiots from before approach the table holding the elf's hand. The blonde guy says he's been drinking with a beautiful woman, calling the protagonist a butcher. Rude gets irritated, thinking that these two are the same ones from last time. The two begin to bother Alicia, telling her to stop drinking with the protagonist and come with them. Suddenly, the protagonist stands up, grabs one of them by the shoulder, and tells him to let her go immediately. The guy gets angry and grabs Rude, cursing at him. Rude and the two guys stare at each other. Alicia tells them to stop immediately. The two look at her while the elf says that they're in a tavern, so if they want to fight, they can sit at a table with her. Alicia raises her glass, happy, and says that whoever drinks the most wins. She starts chugging her first glass. The crowd cheers, and 2 more glasses are placed on the table. The two guys are already somewhat drunk, but the bald guy is drinking 2 glasses at once. Time passes, and the table starts filling up with empty glasses. Rude smiles, watching as the people continue celebrating loudly. The shouts can be heard from across the street. The bald guy is completely defeated. The idiot blonde is also no longer able to handle it, and the elf is still going strong, emerging victorious. Everyone cheers, declaring Alicia as the winner. She turns to the protagonist and shows that she's fine. He smiles and agrees with her. They move to a corner of the bar. Rude tells her that she did really well, considering she had already been drinking before the competition. Alicia simply smiles. She points at him, saying that Rude is her savior, and adds that she didn't sink so low as to just watch while her savior was being ridiculed. Alicia suddenly stops talking and falls into the protagonist's chest. He looks at her and says that he has no choice, activating his substitution skill once again. She sobers up, and he explains that he transferred all her drunkenness to himself, since it doesn't affect him. Alicia is enchanted, saying that first it was the curse, now the drunkenness, and that only makes her want to form a group with him even more. She goes back to the bar, saying she'll drink even more. The elf looks at the dish of the day and says it's a shame she can't try it. The bartender says that apparently monsters have taken over the Burman fishing fields. He's already sent a request to the guild, but all the high-level adventurers are out. He asked the two if they would accept the request. After agreeing, they head to the Barnabas fishing area. Alicia is excited, seeing that the place is really beautiful. She says they need to defeat the monsters as quickly as possible so they can try the chef's special dish. Suddenly, the protagonist notices something. Something rises from the water, nearly hitting him. Rude smiles, saying that the monster the owner mentioned has arrived. Alicia notices something that leaves them both in disbelief. Several other monsters begin to surround the boat they're on. The monsters start appearing beneath the boat. Rude uses his eye to analyze the monsters, seeing their levels and abilities. They begin launching their attacks. The protagonist manages to defend himself using his sword. However, the monsters don't stop attacking, and more keep arriving. Rude continues defending, thinking that the attacks don't stop for a second. The boat starts rocking, and he thinks he won't be able to keep defending without something to brace himself with. He gets irritated and throws his sword away, jumping into the water, thinking that if it's like this, then the real fight begins now. Alicia is left on the boat, not understanding why her partner suddenly jumped into the water. Rude is surrounded by the monsters in the water. However, He smiles and calls the fish to the fight. The monsters begin to attack. Rude uses his skill lightning mantle, hitting them all at once. The attack is so powerful that its intense glow can be seen from the outside. Several monsters begin to rise, already lifeless, and the protagonist also appears on the surface. Alicia shouts for him, worried, but the protagonist reassures her that everything is fine. Surrounded by the bodies of the monsters, he thinks there are still a few left. He notices that the Gurneebs are stopping their attack and retreating. Rude wonders if they are being cautious or if they are protecting something. The protagonist says he will take another look below and asks Alicia to do something. Although confused, she listens carefully to the plan. Rude dives again with a rope tied around him and notices that the monsters aren't attacking or fleeing. This means they are guarding something. He dives a little deeper and is surprised by what he finds. At the bottom of the river, there is a giant creature. Rude uses his eye to analyze it and sees that the monster is level 38. He wonders if it's an anemone or a hermit crab. Suddenly, one of the tentacles begins to make noise and release air. The tentacle detaches from the creature and turns into a new monster. Rude is shocked to see that this creature is generating the Gurneebs. He thinks they need to defeat it, and since the monster isn't attacking, he decides to return and prepare. But suddenly, he feels something holding him. The creature grabbed one of his legs and started pulling him down. The Gurneebs begin to attack, and the protagonist realizes they didn't attack earlier because they wanted to distract him from the tentacles. Rude grabs one of the tentacles and uses lightning mantle. He asks the monster what it thinks, emphasizing that no matter the size of the body, if it's in contact with him, it will take damage. Upon a closer look, the protagonist sees that the tentacles are severed. Rude remembers that it's the autotomy ability. The monster detached its tentacles to avoid fatal damage. Suddenly, the monster starts attacking the protagonist with everything it has. Rude becomes desperate as he's running out of air. He begins pulling the rope, signaling. Outside, Alicia is alert, and as soon as she sees the signal, she knows it's the right time. She begins using her wind magic to push the boat. The rope starts to pull, and in the last second, the protagonist is dragged by the boat. The creature watches him as Rude is pulled away. Once they reach the riverbank, Alicia asks if he's okay. Rude gets up, thanking her for saving him. He explains that there's a boss underwater, continuously producing Gurneebs. Additionally, it has rapid healing, so they need to return quickly. Alicia explains that the monsters have a big advantage underwater, and her magic won't affect them. She asks if he has any plan. Rude says there's only one way. He lowers his head and thinks that he needs to make a decision, as Alicia has already mentioned the curse and even wants to form a team. This is why he needs to reveal his secret before she decides. At the edge of the river, he asks her not to tell anyone what he's about to show. She's confused, but just watches. Meanwhile, at the bottom of the river, the creature is still generating more monsters. Suddenly, it notices something coming in its direction. In the distance, a glow is approaching. It's the protagonist with his high-speed swimming ability. The Gurneebs try to attack him, but he's too fast and defeats them all in seconds. The boss sees this and becomes enraged. It begins attacking with its tentacles, but Rude dodges all of them, continuing to swim between them. He heads straight for the boss. A noise is heard, and the water turns red. The protagonist successfully lands his strike, and now that he's in contact with the boss, he smiles and says, "It's over." Rude uses lightning mantle, hitting the boss with full force. Both the boss and the Gurneebs are defeated. The protagonist thinks that now the fishing spot will have peace, but the problem is Alicia. He worries about what she might think after seeing him devour a monster. With the monster situation resolved, he returns to the surface. When he looks at the shore, he sees no one. The protagonist smiles and starts to leave the water, wondering why he thought she would wait for him. It seems he was just hopeful once again. Suddenly, he hears a voice saying that he's taking too long. This paralyzes Rude. Alicia is carrying some branches while asking if the protagonist is okay and if he defeated the boss. Rude says he managed to defeat the boss. She smiles and says that she couldn't just wait around, so she decided to gather some wood to make a fire and dry the protagonist's clothes. This leaves him speechless. Still confused, Rude asks if everything's okay, even after Alicia saw him do that. She begins setting up the fire and says that she was a little surprised, but smiles and adds that he trusted her enough to reveal the biggest secret he could have, and that made her happier than anything else. Rude is shocked by these words but soon starts to feel better and thanks her for that. The protagonist says there's one more thing. He starts pulling a rope, explaining that he wanted to get the boss's abilities as well, so he cut off a part and brought it with him. As he continues pulling, he comments that it would have been strange if he were the only one eating. Alicia approaches, asking if he really got something. He shows her a fish and says he managed to catch a Barnabas, but that it might be a little strange to eat it near a monster. Before he finishes speaking, Alicia interrupts him, excited, shouting that she's going to eat it. Rude smiles and starts laughing. As the sun begins to set, he comments that while they eat, he'll tell her the story of the first time he ate a monster. They place the food and clothes near the fire. Alicia tries the fish and is happy, saying it tastes delicious, but still a little surprised that the protagonist eats monsters. Rude explains that this was how a weak rank E managed to get closer to his dream. Alicia comments that he used this power to save her from the adventurer hunters and the curse. Watching him eat, she says that when monsters are cooked this way, they really seem tasty. The protagonist had made grenades fillet and sautéed tentacles with miso. He's pleased with the comment and says that monsters are surprisingly tasty. Rude admits that he doesn't need to eat grenades anymore, but emphasizes that they need to be cooked the right way. He asks if Alicia wants to try some, but she replies that she doesn't know if she'd survive the side effects. However, once she finishes eating, she declares she'll have more. With a smile, Alicia asks if the protagonist wants to join her group. He falls silent for a moment, then asks if she doesn't know any stronger people for that. Alicia lowers her gaze and explains that it's been 5 years since she was marked, and that, considering human life expectancy, those who are still alive have probably retired. She points out that most frontline adventurers are crazy, and she can't trust them. Reaching out her hand, she says that she wants someone to adventure with her, someone she can trust 100%. If that person is him, then she's willing to try again. This deeply moves Rude. He closes his eyes, smiles, and accepts the request, saying that now they are a pair. The next day, at the Adventurers Guild, Alicia is excited, shouting that they should prepare for their group's first job. Rude comments that he doesn't think they'll get a good mission since he's rank E. She agrees, but says it's only their first time. They arrive at the reception and call for an attendant. Alicia announces that they're forming a group and asks to register it. Upon seeing the card, the young woman gasps, realizing that Alicia is an S-rank adventurer, and asks if she's Alicia of the Emerald Storm. The attendant continues examining the card, scrutinizing every detail, including the unique skill and other abilities. Then she asks why someone like Alicia is with the Butcher of Miasma. Alicia gets irritated and asks what the attendant just said. The young woman quickly covers up, saying it was nothing. Ignoring the provocation, Alicia asks to have the group registered and inquires about the requirements to raise the protagonist's rank. The attendant checks the reports and informs them that he has already met enough achievements, but still needs to complete combat missions. Determined, Alicia asks for the toughest subjugation mission available. Once they take the mission, they head to the outskirts of Bologna to deal with a wolf pack. The wolves are around level 11, and their main ability is scent detection. Rude smiles and uses his stealth ability, approaching the wolves from behind. By the time the wolves finally notice him, it's already too late. He strikes quickly, taking down several of them. One of the wolves howls, calling reinforcements, and Rude tells Alicia that the new arrivals can be dealt with by her. She doesn't waste time and summons her spirit, Silfiede, asking her to lend her powers. Rude is impressed as he watches his partner's unique ability. Silfiede begins using her powers, enveloping Alicia in a strong aura, leaving Rude even more amazed. The wolves continue attacking, but Alicia counters with Cyclone Slash. A powerful gust of wind is unleashed, instantly defeating the wolves. All the wolves in front of her are eliminated without a chance to fight back. The protagonist is startled by the sheer amount of power. He observes the devastation on the ground and the bodies of the wolves, thinking that it's an absurd force, something impossible to dodge. Alicia smiles and comments that her power before being cursed isn't even back to normal yet. Rude begins to imagine what this woman would be like at full strength. Suddenly a noise catches his attention. More wolves have arrived, and one of them is already charging to attack him. Surprised, he realizes he didn't expect so many wolves to be hiding. The wolf is very close, and Rude wouldn't be able to block the attack in time. Alicia yells for Sylphide, and a strong light appears. The attacking wolf suddenly stops, and everyone is confused as Alicia and Rude vanish. Then, a noise from above catches their attention. When they look up, they see both of them flying. Surprised, Rude comments that this is amazing, and that he didn't expect Alicia to be able to do something like this. He thanks her for saving his life, but she says that if he wants to thank anyone, he should thank the little Sylphide. Looking down, Alicia warns that it's not time to let their guard down yet, mentioning that she saw 5 more wolves in the bushes and that there are probably many more hiding. Rude says it's his turn to act, leaving Alicia confused. He activates his echolocation ability and identifies all the hidden wolves, warning her that there are about 30. He starts laughing, thinking that with those added to the ones they've already faced, they can complete the mission in one go. He asks Alicia to attack the spots he points out. The hidden wolves begin to notice a strong light and become terrified. A powerful attack hits the hideout of some of the wolves, while others try to escape. Alicia continues bombarding from above, knocking down several of them. Rude realizes that his echolocation loses accuracy in open areas and that Alicia can't aim at multiple targets at the same time. However, he concludes that if they attack in a circle, they can concentrate the wolves in one spot. Alicia takes a deep breath, saying that her part is done and the rest is up to him. The wolves, now gathered and scared, become easy prey. Rude calmly approaches and activates paralyzing breath, covering the area with a thick mist. One by one, the wolves fall, immobilized. Observing the scene, Rude thinks it's time to finish the mission. By the end of the afternoon, they tally 52 wolves defeated. Surprised, Alicia says she can't believe they found that many. Rude reflects that maybe the wolf population has grown significantly recently. Curious, he asks about the spirit magic Alicia used earlier. She points to Sylphiade and explains that she can use magic from the spirits present in nature. She says that spirits are everywhere, even if they're not visible. But in order to use their powers, she must offer her own magic as compensation. This way, she can cast powerful spells while consuming little MP. Additionally, Sylphiade has the ability to levitate people. Sylphiade flies up to Rude's head and starts pulling his hair, while he complains that he's never heard of such a strong wind magic. The little spirit continues tugging harder, ignoring his complaints as Alicia laughs, saying that Sylphiade loves to cause trouble and that the more he complains, the more she'll enjoy it. Alicia warns that nightfall is approaching, and they need to head back. Sylphiade starts levitating the protagonist again, and Alicia comments that they will fly part of the way back. With the sun setting on the horizon, Rude flies alongside Alicia, marveling at the experience. He takes the opportunity to ask about the other magics she masters. Alicia explains that she specializes in water, ice, light, and earth magic, but she doesn't have good compatibility with spirits of darkness and fire. She explains that when a spirit has poor compatibility with the user, the magic consumes a lot of energy, or the spirit may refuse to assist. Sylphiade stares at Rude, and Alicia comments that this means she likes him. However, the little spirit starts pulling on the protagonist's ear, causing him to complain and ask if that's how she shows affection. Laughing, Alicia confirms that it is. Suddenly, Rude notices something strange. Up ahead, a column of smoke rises into the sky. He yells to warn Alicia, and comments that there must be a village in that direction. As they approach, they see a monster wandering through the village, destroying everything in its path. People are running in panic while flames spread, and the monster continues its relentless march. Suddenly, the monster stops when it encounters two people. One of them, kneeling, mutters that the wolves weren't the only monsters in the region, asking why a Baphomet would be there. The monster then creates a magical circle, leaving the warrior terrified. Something begins to emerge from within the magical circle, taking the form of a spear. The Baphomet shoots it at high speed toward the two men, but suddenly a water shot hits the spear, saving them. One of the men is confused by what's happening as, amidst the fire, a man appears. It's Rude, who had used his water bullet ability. Beside him is a small water spirit. The monster stares at him intently, but Alicia takes advantage of the distraction and appears behind the men, asking if they're okay. She explains that she and the protagonist will take care of the monster, and asks them to summarize what happened. While Alicia talks to the two men, the protagonist advances and uses his eye to analyze the enemy. The system reveals that the Baphomet is level 27. Rude reflects that, although the monster's level is lower than the general lizard he faced earlier, its stats are on another level, indicating that it's not an ordinary monster. More magical circles begin to form around the Baphomet. The protagonist watches carefully, recognizing it as an advanced ability related to magic principles. The monster begins its attack, forcing Rude to dodge. He thinks that his magic is too weak to be used in battle, but he continues to press forward. The monster, surprised by his audacity, watches as the protagonist approaches. Rude jumps to attack, thinking that if he could devour this monster, it would be perfect, as he could use its magic in battle too. He tries to strike, but the monster blocks the blow with its hand. Surprised, Rude observes the resistance and wonders if that ability is Iron Claw. If it is, he'll have to rely on brute force to overcome it. Taking advantage of the proximity, the Baphomet launches 4 more attacks. An explosion occurs in the area, and the elf is startled by the impact. However, the protagonist appears unharmed, and Alicia runs to him, asking if he's okay. He confirms that he is, while analyzing the monster. Rude realizes that the Baphomet used 2 attacks for offense and kept 2 for defense, which makes it a strategically difficult opponent. Alicia informs him that the monster has raised its guard and they need to exchange information while they can, emphasizing that the villagers haven't fully evacuated yet. She had already requested help for the evacuation and stresses that minimizing collateral damage is the priority, limiting her most powerful magic. As they face the Baphomet, Rude deduces that Alicia must be low on mana due to the previous battle. He decides that it's his responsibility to handle the situation. Suddenly, Alicia asks to be allowed to use her magic, surprising Rude. However, she shows confidence and asks him to trust her. Determined, Rude charges forward, ignoring the monster's attacks and focusing on his own strike. Meanwhile, Alicia begins to cast water magic. Her shots collide with the monster's attacks, protecting the protagonist. Rude is impressed by Alicia's ability to cancel out the Baphomet's magic with an opposing spell of equal power. Realizing the threat, the monster starts using another spell, making several rocks levitate and hurling them toward the two. Alicia, however, maintains her composure and uses her magic to collide the rocks with each other. Rude notices that she is conserving mana, preventing collateral damage with incredible magical control. He smiles, recognizing that this is expected of an S rank. With Alicia's protection, Rude finally reaches the monster and leaps to attack, now using physical reinforcement. This time, he easily breaks through the Baphomet's defense, landing a devastating blow. The monster, filled with rage, tries to attack Rude with its other hand, but the protagonist remains still, fully trusting in his partner. Seconds later, a fire attack hits the Baphomet directly. The monster screams in pain while Alicia, from a distance, controls the flames consuming it. She smiles and taunts the Baphomet, asking how it feels to taste its own power. The monster burns until it finally stops moving. With the danger averted, the villagers watch the scene, terrified by the monster's scream. A young man, still confused, wonders if the explosion and the scream mean that the two adventurers have won. A wounded man laments not being able to help in the battle. Suddenly, Alicia appears, thanking the young man for helping with the evacuation. He asks if she's okay, to which the elf smiles and says yes, confirming that the Baphomet has been defeated. However, she warns that, although she dealt a fatal blow, if the monster survives in any way, it may return to attack. They need to track down the Baphomet to finish the battle, and that's why she wants to ask the villagers for help. The young man shouts that if the monster is within their reach, they will do everything they can to help. She starts laughing, and the young man looks a bit confused. Alicia says that if they have any food to share, she'd be grateful because she's starving. Later, in the forest surrounding the village, the protagonist is preparing the Baphomet's meat. Alicia arrives, happy, saying she's back. He greets her and asks how the villagers are doing. She says that everyone was able to escape safely, thanks to the two adventurers who helped with the evacuation. Alicia sits next to the protagonist and says that she explained to everyone that they were going after the Baphomet, so no one would suspect the body had disappeared. Rude apologizes for making her lie and thanks her for her help. He starts salivating, saying it looks delicious. The Baphomet soup is ready. Rude finishes it off with a bit of mugwort and ginger while Alicia watches. He tastes it and smiles, saying it's delicious, even though it has a strong goat-like flavor. The little elf's mouth waters as she watches him eat. As he eats, new abilities are acquired. Alicia watches the protagonist eating and comments that it looks delicious. However, seeing someone eat a humanoid monster is a bit strange. The protagonist stops eating and thinks she's right. What's even stranger is that he's already gotten used to eating it. While they sit by the fire, another monster appears near them. 3 level 22 stamping monsters stare at them. The elf yells that the monsters are here, and the protagonist says there are many monsters in this area. Rude stands up, saying that if it's come to this, it means it's time for him to test his new magic. Everyone goes silent, and nothing happens. Rude asks what's going on. The stamping monsters start attacking. The protagonist is caught off guard, and the boar rushes past them, hitting the camp and causing a small explosion. The Baphomet soup is thrown to the ground. Alicia screams, saying she thought the protagonist was going to use magic now. Rude starts getting up, irritated, and says he's low on mana so he won't be able to help much. But this is unforgivable. The elf is confused by this. The protagonist looks at the food on the ground and says that he removed all the impurities from the monster to prepare the dish and it took him a long time. He says that he really wanted to savor that meat, so he used the best seasoning. Those pigs would be held accountable for this. Fury takes over the protagonist. His eyes shine, and he yells that he is going to eat those damn creatures now. Alicia is startled by this and shakes him, yelling for him to calm down. She explains that the ability the stamping just used is called Quick Step. This increases their acceleration force, making all their attacks powerful. This means that, even if it's not favorable, they need to fight from a distance to avoid the reach of the Quick Step. The pigs continue staring at them, and she says that, to sum it all up, they need to retreat now. The two run, and the boars chase after them. The night passes, and the boars are still searching for them. Both are perched on a tree. The elf thinks that, by the looks of it, they managed to shake off the pigs. She starts whispering to him about the magic he couldn't use. Rude explains that he's never had trouble using the abilities he's acquired so far. Alicia tells him to analyze it with his analyzing eye. The protagonist agrees, realizing she's right, and starts using the eye. He gets confused because it says he should understand it instinctively. The elf thinks for a moment and says that if he still can't use it, it must be one thing. She pauses and says that he's so stupid and has such a limited brain that that's why he couldn't understand the magic. Rude comments that this was a bit rude. She keeps thinking and says that the protagonist can use fire magic, even if weak, so that's not a good explanation for why he couldn't use the other abilities. Suddenly, the elf has an idea. She says that maybe, for him to use monster magic or abilities, he needs to learn to manipulate mana. Rude says he understands now. It's not enough just to have the magic. He needs to manipulate the mana. Alicia says that she doesn't know much about mana, but it could be similar to absorbing monster abilities. The protagonist says he'll try. He starts focusing and recalls the time he ate the minotaur. His arm and wounds were immediately healed. Soon after, a burst of power starts radiating from his body. Rude thinks that if he can manipulate that power outside of his body, he feels strength building up in his arm. The elf is surprised by what she sees. The protagonist slowly opens his eyes and is also surprised by what he sees. He had created some magic circles in front of him. Rude is pleased, thinking he managed to do it. He fires the attacks, thinking that as long as he can feel the mana, he can use it as if it were part of his body. The stamping look up and see the attacks coming. The blast is so strong that the explosion is enormous. The three boars don't survive the impact. Without wasting any time, Rude runs over and starts frying the boar's meat. Excited, he says that stamping ribs would make the perfect dish. He turns to Alicia and apologizes for making her wait so long, but she says it's fine, as it's something he needs to do. Alicia begins to explain that Rude needs to use mana, not magic, to activate his abilities. Based on his last attack, the protagonist didn't get exhausted. It seems that Rude will be able to use this ability all the time. He agrees, saying that as soon as he felt the mana spreading through his body, he immediately understood how to use it. And if mana can replace magical power, maybe Rude can use it to strengthen his body and weapons. Among adventurers, many decide to polish their magical abilities, with most using them in close combat. By circulating magical power throughout the body, their skills are improved, and if used on a weapon, the attack power increases. It's even possible to unleash magic slashes. The elf says she understands now, pointing out that the protagonist didn't have much magic before, which is why he couldn't use his abilities. He finishes preparing his dish, and says that he now has much more mana than before. But the most important thing is that, apparently, he can replenish his mana by eating more monsters. He eats a piece of the stamping and absorbs the quick step ability. Alicia watches him, thinking that Rude can absorb mana through food and even store it in his body. She looks at his food, drooling, thinking that those pork ribs look delicious. The protagonist sees her drooling and asks if she's craving some. The elf hesitates, trying to hide it. Suddenly they hear another noise and something is coming toward them. They both look to the side, and another monster appears. A super stamping is there before them. Rude says that the boss has finally arrived. The pig charges to attack Alicia. She freezes, as the boss is too fast, and she won't be able to get away. Rude sees this and uses his quick step ability to save her from the attack. The elf thanks him once again for saving her life. She watches the boss, thinking that the moment she felt something from a distance, it was already right in front of her. She's confused since they're not in a dungeon. A monster like that shouldn't be here. Suddenly, the protagonist starts getting angry again, saying that it's always the same nonsense. The food he made has been ruined once more. He yells at the boss, telling him to stop interrupting. He asks if that boss would make a good roast but quickly thinks better of it, since it has fire resistance. However, if they threw it in the eye to fry, it would taste good. That's the king stamping, level 38. Rude thinks its stats are pretty strong too. He crouches and starts using earth magic. The boss only has quick step and fire resistance. A hand begins to rise from the ground, and the protagonist tells the boss to prepare to feel the wrath of a glutton. However, the king easily breaks the attack, leaving Rude stunned, thinking it was iron. The monster lands a blow directly on the protagonist, sending him flying. Rude crashes into a tree and falls unconscious. Alicia is worried about him, but there's no time, as the boss is coming toward her. She summons Sylphide and uses her wind attacks to hurt the boss. The elf begins to breathe thoughtfully. She thinks she hit the boss, but the boss isn't using magic, as its muscles and fur are as thick as armor. She can't win against that. The king stands face to face with her. Alicia is worried, thinking he's coming. The boss begins charging to attack again. Suddenly, an enormous pressure is felt, and a fierce roar echoes through the forest, causing the boss to stop. Rude is angry. He stands up, telling the pig not to dare ignore him, as they're not finished yet. Rude thinks that he can't use Quick Step or Body of Iron right now, and if he turns this into a battle of friction, there's a chance the damn pig will target the elf. The protagonist analyzes the situation, but realizes he doesn't have an ability to defeat the boss in one move, even though the pig only charges in a straight line. With no other options, he closes his eyes, thinking it's the first time he'll use this. He raises his sword, thinking that he needs to try. The boss charges toward him quickly. Alicia screams, witnessing the scene before her eyes. Rudy thinks that first, he needs to gather the mana from within his body. Then, he needs to imagine it flowing into the sword. The boss looks at the protagonist and attacks. At the last second, Rude opens his eyes, and with one strike, ends the battle. Alicia is stunned. The boss has been defeated. However, even the protagonist is confused by his own power. He looks around and says that he managed to do it. The elf is in shock, saying that the protagonist used mana to strengthen his sword, even without any practice. Rude smiles, saying he tried doing it because he felt it was possible, since his mana was overflowing. Suddenly, his sword cracks and breaks in front of them. Alicia looks at the sword, not expecting that. On the other hand, the protagonist becomes desperate and starts shouting for his sword. Disheartened, Rude says that he used it a lot, so there's nothing to be done. The elf says that the sword couldn't handle the mana. Moreover, she understands how he feels, as the weapon is an extension of the body. The protagonist says they should call it a day, noting that he'll get some meat from the boss. Meanwhile, in the miasma dungeon on the 7th floor, the boy from earlier is in battle. He uses his firepower to attack a large level 17 rat. His companions were also helping him fight the rats. The one in the black cloak strikes a rat, easily finishing it off. After a long battle, they finish clearing the area. The young man says that these are a superior species of miasma rats. The big rat is a tough opponent. His colleagues smile and say that, even so, they were no match for their great teamwork. They begin to laugh. However, the one in the black cloak looks back, and the leader asks what happened. The young man begins to walk, saying it's nothing serious, just that he thought he heard voices. Suddenly, they find a staircase, and thinking it's a secret passage, they decide to take a look. As they descend the stairs, the three are impressed, as there, before them, is a glowing chest. The young man takes a good look and says it doesn't seem to be a trap, while his companion suggests it might be treasure. They find a sword in the chest. The boy says he can feel magic emanating from it. The three are happy, thinking it's strong, so they'll be able to sell it for a good price. Rigurd asks if they're sure it's not cursed. However, the leader tells him not to be so pessimistic. He explains that since they didn't find the protagonist there, they're struggling to make easy money. This means that this is a blessing sent to them. Rigurd agrees with that. The boy in the black cloak smiles, saying they're staying out pretty late. It's good that the sword is a blessing. Rigurd says he heard that Rude has been hanging out with a beautiful elf lately. The two start laughing, saying he's full of himself, and that they'll give him a good lesson so he learns his place. They start to leave the room, but Rigurd stays behind, staring at the chest. He starts staring intently at the open chest. While Rigurd was looking at the chest, the sword tried to influence its bearer to finish off everyone. The next day, in the border town of Bologna, the protagonist and the elf were walking through the streets, and he says he was thinking about asking for advice from a weapon vendor he knows. They head to a place called Miner's Hammer Weapon Shop. The shop owner, named Doam, starts inspecting the protagonist's sword. He says that for a sword he personally forged to be broken like that, only brute force could have caused that kind of damage. Doam asks the protagonist what he imbued into the sword. Alicia whispers, asking if he's going to tell. Rude says yes, and explains that he'll tell him everything, as he's known old Doam for a long time and trusts him completely. After hearing the story, Doam is intrigued to learn that if the protagonist eats monsters, he gains their abilities. He points out that this is why Rude's power has skyrocketed. The elfin girl remarks that Doam doesn't seem that surprised. The old man says that as long as it tastes good, it doesn't matter what is eaten. Doam then adds that the most important thing is that the protagonist wants a sword that can withstand a good amount of mana. He emphasizes that, considering the research time, it will take a while to forge one. Rude asks if there's anything he can do to help. The old man responds that it would be good to have some high-quality magical stones. The protagonist says he has some materials with him. As soon as he throws the stones on the table, Doam is impressed, thinking that among them are the stone of the general lizard, Baphomet, and even that of a minotaur. He comments that it seems Rude's abilities have improved quite a lot. The protagonist, embarrassed, says that being praised by the old man feels good. Doum says that if anything else is needed, he will let them know. While he's preparing a new sword, the old man gives one to the protagonist to use. Doum warns him that under no circumstances should he imbue that sword with mana, because if he breaks it, the old man will demand an absurd compensation. The protagonist and Alicia are scared, but they agree. Once they leave the shop, they head straight to the tavern. The elfin girl suggests that they avoid magical attacks for a while. Rude comments that the old man becomes terrifying when it comes to his weapons. Alicia smiles, saying that although Doum is intense, she's happy to have met one of his friends. The protagonist feels embarrassed and apologizes for being a loner. She starts laughing, and then the boy from earlier enters, saying that it looks like they're having fun. He asks if he and his friends can join them, calling the protagonist the Butcher of Miasma. Rude gets upset, saying it's happening again. The elfin girl looks at them and asks if they have a problem with them, because if so, they could settle it by drinking like good adventurers. Rondo starts shaking with anger and suddenly loses his balance, falling under the nearby table. The leader looks worried, asking if he had been drinking alone or something. However, he sees that Rondo hasn't sold the sword he found in the dungeon. The sword starts releasing a solemn aura, urging Rondo to attack everyone there. He tries to resist, but the influence of the sword is driving him mad. Rondo tries to stop it, but he's overcome by the sword's rage and screams at his leader to shut up. He charges forward, shouting, and attacks his companion. Rigurd is confused as he sees Magnus get hit by the attack. Still filled with anger, Rondo turns and aims his attack at the elfin girl. However, Rude steps in front and defends the blow, saying that this won't be solved with just a drink. Magnus begins to fall after being injured. Rigurd continues to be worried, not knowing what to do. The protagonist keeps staring at Rondo. Rude keeps looking at him, wondering what is wrong with that guy. Other adventurers get angry, asking what Rondo is doing in the middle of their celebration. One of the men tries to hold him back, but the sword continues to release more power. With a single strike, Rondo manages to defeat the adventurers. Alicia apologizes to the innkeeper for what she's about to do, but she has to destroy everything. She casts her magic and shoots at Rondo, hitting him and throwing him away, destroying the entire place. They move toward the hole in the wall and wonder what the hell is going on with that guy. Alicia is shocked to see Rondo getting up and saying he will defeat everyone there. Rude asks if she held back her attack power. The elfin girl says that a mediocre adventurer shouldn't be able to get up after taking a direct hit like that. Rondo starts making strange noises and charges again, shouting that he will finish everyone off. The protagonist rushes toward him, yelling that this is wrong. Alicia tells one of the adventurers there to take care of the wounded. The two clash their attacks again. Rude takes the opportunity to analyze Rondo's status, which shows he's at level 22, but his status is madness. The protagonist continues to just defend against Rondo's attacks, thinking that the young man has entered berserk mode. The sword continues to release more power. Rude notices that compared to the usual Rondo, his status is incredibly higher. Alicia screams for the protagonist to get out of the way. He looks at her, who already has her magic ready, saying that this time she will attack with full force. Rude leaps to the side as the elfin girl fires her attack. However, the sword says face and begins absorbing all that energy. Alicia can't believe that the sword truly absorbed all that damage. She notices that the sword is emitting even more energy, completely engulfing the boy's body. Alicia shouts for the protagonist to be careful, because that is a cursed sword. Rude looks at Rondo and asks if he's getting stronger by absorbing that magic. The boy is already surrounded by various things around his body. He can no longer speak, and only attacks. The protagonist defends the blow, but notices that Rondo's strength is increasing with each moment. He keeps defending the attacks, but the boy doesn't stop attacking even for a second. Rude begins to strike as well, aiming for non-lethal points, and manages to hit one of Rondo's legs. However, he's surprised to see the tentacles closing the wound. Alicia watches, worried, because she can't support the protagonist since the sword might absorb her magic and get even stronger. However, she doesn't want to just watch and thinks that if she really wants to help her partner, she needs to find an opening and land a decisive blow. Suddenly, Rigurd appears, begging them not to finish off Rondo. He continues shouting, telling the protagonist that he knows they've made many mistakes against him, but that, for a failure like him, even though he lived being despised and despising others, his companions have become his family. With tears in his eyes, he pleads for his friend's life. Rude charges forward, saying he will do his best. Rondo keeps shouting and attacking. The protagonist states that he will attempt the substitution and warns that no one can interfere. The elfin girl smiles and says she understands. He dodges an attack, thinking that when he used this technique with Alicia, it took about 10 seconds. Rondo keeps attacking without stopping, while the protagonist dodges everything, thinking that the problem is keeping this guy under control for those 10 seconds while he tries to get rid of the curse. The protagonist takes a blow that pushes him aside. Alicia screams in concern, but he had blocked it with his sword, saying that the blows are very strong. He clings to the arm holding the sword, thinking that if he only mobilizes the sword, he'll be able to resist. Rondo tries to shake the protagonist off, but Rude starts using his ability. The boy can't free his arm. Rude uses earth magic to hold Rondo, since he won't be able to absorb this magic. The boy is completely immobilized. Rude releases Rondo's arm and moves closer, thinking that if the cause of his madness is the curse, he can free him just like he did with Alicia. This way he can bring him back to normal. Rude activates the substitution and strikes Rondo's chest. A dense aura begins to emanate, but the protagonist doesn't retreat and keeps trying to use his ability. Slowly, Rondo starts to return to normal. Magnus and Rigurd watch this. Rondo begins to cry, begging for help. The protagonist remains determined to remove the curse from the boy, but the curse begins to fight back against him. Suddenly, Rude is thrown away. Alicia screams in concern and the protagonist says he's fine. However, the substitution failed. Rondo is once again dominated by the curse, and the prison Rude had created starts to crack. The protagonist thinks that it wasn't Rondo who rejected the substitution. It was almost as if the sword had a will of its own. So, if he can weaken the sword a little more, maybe he can stop the curse. He begins firing his fire attacks at Rondo. Before the attack can hit, the boy breaks free. The protagonist grows worried, realizing that he only managed to remove the curse from Rondo's left arm, but now, since it's like this, he just needs to attack from outside the reach of Rondo's right arm. Rondo's body is almost completely covered by the tentacles. Rude notices that Rondo is making strange movements. He managed to move, and the attack went straight to the sword, which absorbed the magic completely. The sword reached a very high level of mana and released all the energy into Rondo's body, causing him to scream in pain. A gigantic pressure, with a dense aura, began to be released on a large scale. Alicia watched this, thinking it was the incarnation. Rondo's arms and legs started to take on a different shape, which meant his body no longer belonged to him. Rude used his analysis skill. The system displayed that what was in front of him was the two-headed curse called Gram, a cursed race with the condition of incarnation. Within seconds, the curse attacked the protagonist, but he managed to dodge the attack. Rude continued fighting fiercely against the creature, but Gram's attacks were incredibly strong. The protagonist was hit by a blow and thought Gram was too fast, but upon analyzing further, Rude realized that the curse was simply not making unnecessary movements, just like an experienced warrior. Suddenly, Gram appeared behind the protagonist, who turned to face him, seeing the attack coming. The elfin girl, seeing her partner in danger, decided to act, circulating magic through her body. She charged and landed a flying kick on Gram, but he used his tail to hold himself steady. Alicia took advantage of the short distance and fired a powerful attack at the monster, sending it flying. Gram hit a wall, causing a huge noise. Alicia said that, apparently, she would have to interfere a bit in the fight. Rude thanked her, noting that he didn't know she fought well at close range. Alicia replied that a mage who becomes useless when the enemy gets too close is a burden to their companions. Placing her hand on the arm she had injured, she said that this was not an opponent they could take lightly, stressing that Rude needed to make a choice because the curse had already advanced too much. Gram got up again, and the elfin girl said that if they didn't fight to finish this, they wouldn't be able to stop it. The protagonist hesitated to make this choice, but then prepared himself and said he understood. The healer asked Magnus to stay still, but he started to get up and called Rigurd. He asked if he had heard what Alicia said earlier. Meanwhile, the two were fighting against the curse, but even with two people, they couldn't find an opening. The protagonist thought that maybe two heads would expand Gram's field of vision. He yelled for the elfin girl to fall back for a while. Though confused, she listened to her partner and moved away from the curse. Rude slapped his hand on the ground and created several magical circles that raised a wall. Alicia saw this and thought she understood, because if they used the magic just to raise the wall, Gram wouldn't be able to absorb it. In the middle of the wall, a shadow of a person was seen, and the curse noticed this. It turned around and attacked the shadow with everything it had, but it was just a clay dummy created as a distraction. The real Rude was behind it. Without hesitation, the protagonist landed a powerful blow that hit Gram directly. This created an opening for Alicia, who was already in front of him, ready to strike. She began to cast her magic, summoning the spirit of Earth, a tribute magic. The Earth spirit appeared. Its name was Nomia. Alicia used Nomia's power and hit the curse with a powerful Earth attack. However, she became worried as the shot didn't finish off the curse. Quickly, Gram attacked her. Suddenly, Rigurd grabbed the curse's arm, stopping the attack. Rude was astonished to see both of them fighting. Crying for his friend, Rigurd shouted that he would stop Graham, even if it cost him his life. Magnus also charged forward to attack, shouting that, this way, the three of them. He landed a decisive blow to the heart of the curse. Graham began to scream in pain, while Magnus stood firm, though tears streamed down his face. The three of them collapsed to the ground together. The curse was defeated. The price was the life of their companion, friend, and brother. Rude and Alicia remained silent, simply staring at the scene. While neither of them could express the pain of losing a friend, Rude noticed that beside them, the sword was lying on the ground. He approached it and picked it up. Rude thinks that even if he hides the sword somewhere, he can't know when the next victim will appear. Suddenly, the sword begins to speak to him, ordering him to destroy everything and everyone. Rude stares at it and uses his unique skill. The system notifies him that the curse has been nullified. The protagonist tells the sword to shut up, saying that its empty words don't work on him. Suddenly, Lankars opens the guild door, asking if everyone is okay. Rondo is lying on the ground, his body disappearing. Rude holds the sword and says that it's over. Lankars sees everything and asks them to meet at the guild so they can clarify what happened. After the explanation, Lankars says that it seems Rondo increased his strength thanks to the curse of the sword. With Magnus's testimony, all the other adventurers will discuss what happened. The guildmaster notices the protagonist holding the sword and asks if he feels anything while holding it. Rude replies that, thanks to his unique skill to nullify abnormal statuses, no curse has any effect on him. As long as he is the bearer of the sword, there will be no more victims. Lankars says he understands but adds that if the day comes when the protagonist is overtaken by the curse of the sword, Rude interrupts him, saying that when that time comes, the guildmaster should do whatever needs to be done. The elfin girl looks a little distressed at this. Lankars thanks the protagonist and Alicia for containing the incident, and as for Magnus and Rigurd, the master says he would like to offer his condolences. However, no one there will have time to rest. The elfin girl asks if something happened. The guildmaster explains that all the adventurers there with him were called for exactly this reason. He explains that recently, the number of monsters outside the dungeons has been increasing at an abnormal rate. It seems these new monsters are coming from a newly discovered dungeon in Abellio. According to the research, the cause of this is a certain monster. Rude asks what monster this is. Lankars says it's the Basilista miasma dragon. He notes that he's only seen this monster in books, but its estimated level is around 70. The protagonist is impressed. The guildmaster says that the level isn't the problem, but rather the concentration of miasma. It's said that its miasma stimulates other monsters, causing them to leave the dungeon. This is what led to casualties in the research team, and those who managed to return are being treated right now. Lankars says that if this continues, it won't stop with just the monsters, as the miasma will leak from the dungeon. The damage to the nearby areas would be immeasurable, and that's why he called them there. Rude says he understands the situation and asks to be taken immediately to the research team that returned. They go to the medical wing. The protagonist approaches one of the injured, who is in intense pain. With a gentle touch, Rude begins using his substitution ability. Lankars watches this, saying it's unbelievable. The elfin girl just smiles from a distance. The adventurer, who was previously screaming in pain, is now able to sleep peacefully. The guildmaster says that this is surprising because he didn't know the protagonist could nullify other people's statuses too. Rude explains that he can only do this if the person he touches doesn't reject it, and that's why the only ones who will participate in the hunt for the dragon are him and Alicia. One of the adventurers says this is madness. Lankars looks intently at the protagonist and asks what the chances are of them winning. Rude explains that the fewer people he has to protect from the miasma, the easier it will be for him to move. Besides, he's already used to fighting powerful opponents alone. The adventurer says that the protagonist sounded very impressive just now, but even so, it's risky. The guildmaster sighs and pats the protagonist on the shoulder, saying he understands and accepts it. He will entrust the protagonist with the mission to subdue the Basilista miasma dragon. It's already nighttime, and once everything is settled, the protagonist and the elfin girl begin to leave. He says they need to rest well to be prepared for tomorrow. She asks if everything will be all right, even if it's just the two of them. Rude smiles and says he can only use all his abilities if no one else is around. He lowers his head and apologizes to Alicia for dragging her into this mess. She asks what he's talking about, saying that if he had said he was going without her, he would have gotten a beating right then and there. Rude says that they are a team, and that just the two of them will be enough to save everyone. She jumps up happily, agreeing with him. The next day, in the Abellio dungeon, on the lower floors, A level 20 Bob-Goblin was attacking the protagonist. However, he easily defeats them. Rude says that, just like the explorers told them, they still need to go down about 5 more floors, but no one mentioned that the miasma was spreading this far. The elfin girl says that this just shows how quickly it's spreading, as even her purification items are having trouble cleansing the miasma. They look down the hallway, and the protagonist says it doesn't look like the monsters on the lower floors are still alive. Rude points out that they still don't know how many floors they'll have to go through, and asks if she doesn't want to stop. She interrupts him, saying no. Alicia says that the protagonist's attributes might not work against the monsters, and even if she has to fight up close, she'll land a few hits. Also, if she runs away and leaves another friend behind, she'll never forgive herself. Rude apologizes for making her say that again. He touches her and begins using his ability. With a big smile, he says that he will use substitution on her miasma status. She looks at him. The protagonist explains that he had already expected this, and that every time he touches her, he'll be able to remove the effects. But as soon as he lets go, the miasma starts to slowly accumulate again. She smiles and says that, if that's the case, the elfin girl takes his hand and, all happy, says that they just need to hold hands. Smiling, she says that she can barely see her feet because of all the miasma, so in addition to using substitution, he should guide her too. Rude smiles and says he understands. The two of them start walking happily through the dungeon. Sometime later, they reach the mid-level floors. The deeper they went, the more miasma there was. Rude says that he used echolocation and there are 2 monsters ahead. Alicia says that if these monsters have been able to withstand all this miasma, they must be strong opponents. Rude agrees, adding that he's never seen monsters like them before. The elfin girl asks if there's a way to avoid them. The protagonist says yes, but he wants to fight the 2 of them. She looks at him and asks if Rude wants to eat them. He says it's not that, though he is a little curious. The protagonist says he wants to test the sword before facing the miasma dragon. A little further ahead, they encounter both monsters. They are rolling beetles, level 33 with high stats. Rude starts using his magic. Among the monsters, the ground begins to crack, and suddenly, earth spikes shoot up from the ground, throwing the monsters away. The elf girl is impressed, but the attack doesn't have a great effect. One of the beetles gets angry, curls up, and starts rolling toward them. Rude asks if Alicia can stop the attack, and she says yes, but she'll need to let go of his hand for a moment. The elf girl summons Nomia and shouts to catch him. She starts using her earth magic, creating a giant hand that grabs the beetle. Alicia tells the protagonist to act fast, as she won't be able to hold it for long. Rude advances, saying it's time to test his new weapon. He begins imbuing it with his mana. The sword becomes desperate, while the protagonist tells it not to dare break. A few seconds later, he's ready and charges, delivering a blow that cuts everything in front of him. The beetle falls to the ground, injured, but Rude is not pleased with the result since the attack wasn't strong enough. The monster starts screaming in front of him. He raises his sword, thinking that if he couldn't put enough power into it, he would have to take a risk in another way. Rude calls the elf girl, who smiles, saying she understands everything. The beetle starts attacking, and Alicia also releases her magic. The protagonist uses the sword to absorb the elf girl's attack. The sword begins to absorb everything and becomes fully charged. The beetle is already close enough, and when Rude is about to be hit, he tells the sword it's time to show everything it has. With just one strike, the monster is completely defeated. What remains of the monster starts falling to the ground, and the protagonist looks at what he just did. Looking back, the other beetle is trembling in fear, but its end is inevitable. Rude attacks, finishing off the last monster. With both defeated, he returns to the elf girl, praising her perfect control of magic. She smiles and says everything went well. Rude takes her hand and uses substitution to remove the accumulated miasma once again. He asks if he could take a bit more, but Alicia doesn't understand what he means. The protagonist tries to explain that absorbing his magic didn't restore all his internal mana. She says that means he's going to eat the monsters. Rude says he wouldn't do that there, he would just take some pieces and take them with them. While walking, the protagonist cooks a piece of meat with his magic. He starts eating and says it has a unique taste. Alicia asks how it was using the sword. Rude says that once the sword absorbed enough magic, his physical abilities drastically improved. She points out that the most important thing is that the sword wouldn't break, even if he put mana into it. The protagonist says that what worries him is that, according to reports, the miasma dragon is bigger than a tree. He wonders how effective his new sword will be since, in terms of weight, his old sword was better. The sword looks around and asks the protagonist to give her something. Rude is confused, but she keeps asking. The protagonist asks if she wants to eat meat, but the sword says no. She says she wants the magic stone. Rude goes to the monster and starts looking for the stone. As soon as he finds it, he hands it to the sword, which grabs the stone and starts absorbing it. After finishing consuming the stone, an aura begins to emanate. Rude sees the transformation and is happy, saying the sword got much bigger. The elf girl asks how he knew what to do, and the protagonist explains that it was the sword who told him. The sword begins laughing after being praised, and the protagonist wonders if it got upset when he said she was weaker than the old one. Rude says he now understands how the sword works. Alicia says that's good because the next floor is where the dragon was last seen. Suddenly, they hear a very loud roar that makes everything shake. Alicia asks if that was the dragon's roar. The ceiling begins to crack, and Rude realizes and shouts that the ceiling is going to collapse unless they hold it up with earth magic. The elf girl says that if they only try to protect themselves, the stairs will be blocked and they'll lose the chance to fight the dragon. She calls Sylphaid, saying that in that case, before everything collapses, they will try to cross. Alicia begins to fly, dragging the protagonist with her. Everything starts breaking and falling as they fly. They both feel anxious as the floor keeps compressing more and more. Finally, they can see the end of the stairs, and as soon as they pass, an explosion happens right behind them. However, they manage to reach safety. Rude says he thought that was the end. The elf girl smiles, saying she used a lot of magic for that. As soon as they look ahead, they notice that the floor is darker than the others. The protagonist says he can use thermal vision while they walk slowly, looking for enemies. He uses his vision and notices something in the back of the floor. He says that it looks like something very large is on the other side. That's the miasma dragon. Its level is 75, with stats higher than any other monster they've seen, and it possesses a wide variety of abilities. Rude says the dragon's level is 75, but its agility isn't very high, though its vitality is above 500. She asks about its abilities. He says the dragon has poisonous fangs and claws. Suddenly, they hear another extremely loud noise. The dragon has noticed their presence. Alicia yells, asking what its resistances are. Rude says it's fire, earth, and darkness. She says she'll use other attributes and asks him to be her vanguard. The dragon reaches them, and the protagonist shouts that it's time for the big battle. The dragon keeps roaring and spewing miasma everywhere. Rude thinks he wants to keep his distance and better analyze its attack patterns, but in such thick miasma, he can't tell how much Alicia can withstand. So, he wants to finish this as quickly as possible. Suddenly, he notices something. In the middle of the miasma, a light begins to grow stronger. Out of nowhere, a blast of fire is shot by the dragon. He manages to dodge using instant step. The attack destroys everything it touches. Alicia is shocked, as the attack managed to melt the pillar and the floor. The temperature of the environment is rising non-stop as the dragon doesn't stop its fire attack. It keeps firing at the protagonist, who just runs to dodge. The elf girl sees her partner in danger and asks Sylphaid to help him. She manages to use magic on Rude's feet, drastically increasing his movement speed. With this, he manages to land an attack on the monster. As he looks back, he sees that he only caused a small wound, as the dragon's scales are too tough. Rude thinks that he might not be able to hurt the dragon with his sword. Moreover, the magic he used also had no effect. He yells and calls Alicia. She starts attacking too. The air blades hit directly, but she can't believe what she's seeing, as even with spirit magic, they barely did any damage to the dragon. The monster starts swinging its tail, and several spikes begin to come out of it. Both of them are shocked by this. With one move, the dragon breaks a pillar and shoots several spikes toward them. Alicia tries to protect herself with her shield, while the protagonist uses his iron body to tank the hits. He thinks that the dragon has strong defense and long-range attacks. How would they manage to defeat it? The elf girl yells and asks the protagonist to buy them some time. He's confused, but she explains that before her stats go down, she will use her special attack. Rude understands and prepares himself. The dragon watches them while she casts her magic. As soon as the monster notices, it prepares to attack her. The protagonist uses his earth magic, and several hands begin to emerge, punching the dragon. He takes advantage of this opening and jumps to attack. Rude manages to land a good hit on the dragon's nose, making its attack go downward. Alicia continues to cast her magic and thinks that she'll be exposed, so she will trust her defense to the protagonist. This way, she will compensate for his part and use all her power in the attack. She summons another spirit, called Salam. Rude continues fighting and distracting the dragon. The water spirit, Urdil, appears. The protagonist continues his efforts, while the elf girl gathers all the spirits with her. Nomiya and Wakian also appear. The dragon notices this, but the magic is almost ready. Desperate, the dragon turns toward her and begins attacking with everything it has. Quickly, the attack heads in her direction, but at the last second, Rude steps in front and uses the sword to absorb the entire attack. Alicia yells that it's ready and asks the protagonist to get out of the way. He smiles and steps aside. The elf girl begins her attack, using her technique called Quintet of Spirits. A powerful surge of energy is released, aimed at the dragon. As soon as the attack lands, it causes a massive explosion in front of them. Already weakened by the miasma, she says that in the past, she could have taken down the dragon with a single shot. Amid the smoke, the dragon starts to emerge, its body covered in numerous injuries but still standing. Rude touches her shoulder, saying she did an excellent job, but now it's his turn to have some fun. Parts of the dragon begin falling off, as it's severely wounded. Alicia apologizes for making him use substitution again, as she used all her magic in the last attack. He asks her to use what's left to protect herself because from now on, the rest is up to him. She starts using magic on herself and asks him to be careful. Rude faces the dragon, which, despite its injuries, stares back at him. The monster lets out a deafening roar, but the protagonist takes a deep breath and roars back. The dragon is confused by such a roar. Rude stomps the ground so hard it begins to crack. He leaps with incredible speed. The dragon tries to hit him, but the protagonist's mobility is too high. The dark magic he absorbed seems to have infused the sword with a new kind of power. Rude smiles and continues moving at high speed, overflowing with energy. The dragon moves, and its scales begin to fall off. The protagonist notices this and says it's now easier to cut. He speeds up his movements even more and starts attacking the dragon from various angles. As he attacks, he realizes the sword is becoming less effective since the mana it absorbed is being depleted. Hurt and irritated, the dragon glares at the protagonist and releases another wave of miasma, throwing him backward. He thinks that even though the miasma doesn't affect him, the shock wave still pushes him. The monster wastes no time and uses the distance to attack with its spikes again. Rude thinks he can't dodge and uses instant step. This allows him to avoid the spikes. The dragon uses its arm to strike at him. With no time to evade, the protagonist is hit and uses his iron body along with the sword to defend himself. However, the attack is extremely powerful and throws him against the wall with a terrifying crash. Rude cries out in pain, thinking he has figured out the distance the dragon covers with instant step. His vision starts to blur. He admits dragons are truly incredible. The monster begins to approach him. Despite having no strength left, Alicia screams for her companion. Rude remembers the first time he almost died, the fight against the Minotaur and the fall into the pit. He gathers his strength and says this time is different. Using his earth ability, he creates a hand that throws him upward. He thinks that the him from back then can't compare to who he is now. Rude prepares himself and starts falling toward the dragon, which sees him coming and prepares a new attack. The protagonist thinks the dragon will use its breath again, and perhaps he could avoid it with web manipulation, but if he keeps dodging like that, he'll lose in an endurance battle. Rude decides it's better to use the webs as a slingshot to attack. He gains momentum and throws himself at the dragon, which fires its power with all its might. Both charge at each other. Rude starts absorbing the attack with his sword. As he does, he thinks there's nothing he can do about the heat. However, he can still absorb the mana contained in the attack if his fire resistance is sufficient to withstand it. Then, he can reinforce the weapon with more mana and combine it with all the mana the sword has already absorbed, releasing it all at once. He continues without hesitation, and even though the attack is powerful, the protagonist holds firm with his sword. The amount of mana and heat is overwhelming, and it becomes more unbearable by the second, until suddenly, he's enveloped in a layer of water. From a distance, the elf girl shouts for him to hurry. With the heat no longer hindering him, he can move freely now. Rude shouts a thanks and gathers all his accumulated power, delivering a devastating blow that strikes the dragon directly. The sound of the strike echoes throughout the dungeon. The dragon meets its end. Rude smiles at the conclusion of this intense battle. He falls to the ground, drained of energy. Alicia runs to him, saying she'll heal him right away. Rude raises his hand and tells her she doesn't need to go beyond what she already has. He starts using his leeching ability, and all the dragon's plasma begins to leave its body and gather in his hand. Rude says he can recover a bit this way. After a short recovery, he collapses on the floor, saying it's time for a break. The elf girl stands beside him, and he reaches out his hand to her, calling her. Alicia is delighted by this and runs to take his hand. As soon as they touch, he uses substitution once more. They lie side by side, and he says they finally made it. Alicia takes a deep breath and says that, yes, they finally did. She turns to him and asks if this is just the beginning. The protagonist smiles and says yes. He remembers the rank S adventurer who saved him. That person was far stronger than he is now. Rude sighs and says they still have a long way to go. He gets up and says that, before anything else, he needs to get some dragon meat. Afterward, they begin descending further into the dungeon. As they open a door, the protagonist is stunned by what he sees. In front of them is a magic circle with a sphere behind it. That's the core of the dungeon. The elf girl says that even among adventurers, it's rare to see this. If they use the magic circle on the core, they would be teleported directly to the entrance of the dungeon, instantly returning. The two approach the core, and Alicia explains that it's normal to leave the core intact, as they take materials from the dungeon that don't exist on the surface. Rude says that if they leave it here, one day the miasma dragon will be resurrected. He starts reaching for his sword, thinking that the dungeon of Abellio was where he had his worst experience, but it was because of everything he endured there that he was able to open a door to fulfill his dream. The protagonist raises his sword and thanks the dungeon for everything it has done in his life. With one strike, he shatters the core, and a bright light fills the room. Meanwhile, at the guild's base, everyone is gathered. Lankars asks if anyone has heard anything from Rude's group. A girl replies that, unfortunately, they haven't received any news of their return. The master lowers his head, saying he understands. He starts thinking that he always knew they were calling him the miasma butcher in the adventurer world. Power is everything, and that's why, even if Lankars tried to mediate the situation, it would never stop, because the life of a powerless adventurer is harsh and difficult. But if this was enough to make the protagonist give up on his dreams, then it was just another path to walk. Suddenly, a person rushes into the room saying they need to report something. The guildmaster is startled, and the man says that Rudy and Alicia just returned using the magic circle. He emphasizes that the tasks of subduing the dragon and destroying the dungeon's core have been completed. Lankars is stunned to hear this. Everyone in the room begins to cheer and celebrate this victory, except for the guildmaster, who is still frozen from hearing the news. He starts smiling, saying he couldn't believe that, among all the adventurers, Rude would be the one to save the city. Lankars stands up and says they should go greet them. Those two are the adventurers with the power to change their fate. The protagonist and the elf girl are happy to see all the celebration. Elsewhere, in a city called Golar, a man receives a letter that leaves him angry at the city of Bologna. The old man was upset, saying that Bologna has so many dungeons that they destroyed the core of one of them without a second thought. He threw the paper, shouting that their plan to claim the new dungeon had been ruined. A young man asked if that wasn't actually a good thing. He explained that Bologna couldn't deny Golar's rightful claim to the new dungeon, which is why they destroyed it. If they spun this story, they could demand Bologna compensate them for the profits they could have made from the dungeon. The Lord thought it would be better to profit this way than to challenge the dungeon and lose adventurers. However, if they did that, the Adventurers Guild of Bologna wouldn't stay silent. The young man replied that this was exactly what they wanted. This way, they could show that old man and his team who was truly superior. Night fell, and Sylphide was watching the birds. Rude and the elf girl were camping. The protagonist was preparing the dragon steak, which was extremely rare. Alicia began salivating again, saying the smell was amazing. Rude smiled and said it had been at the bottom of his bag for quite a while. He had taken it from the dragon and was finally able to eat it. As soon as the meat was ready, he cut a piece and started eating. The protagonist was amazed by the taste, saying it was delicious. He remarked that this meat made every piece of meat he had ever eaten before seem mediocre. The sweet taste of the meat was exquisite, and the fat melted in his mouth along with the flavor of the red meat. It was perfect. Alicia was eager to eat. She stood up and said that it was decided. With honor and courage, she proclaimed that tonight they would eat award-winning meat. Rude shouted that he was already eating some. She got irritated and called him selfish. Meanwhile, Sylphide was relaxed, and the elf girl was shouting at the protagonist, telling him they needed to go back soon and find a good restaurant. After the destruction of the Abellio dungeon, 4 days passed. Some reports were being written, and the guildmaster apologized for calling them there so many times, but assured them that this would be the last. He informed Rude and Elfinia that the raid report had finally been confirmed. Lankars then took out a bag full of money and said that this was the reward for both of them, worth 1.5 million Regan. The protagonist was shocked and shouted, asking if that was really the correct amount. The master explained that the average level requirement for the Abellio dungeon was 70, so this was the appropriate reward. Rude glanced at the enormous sum, amazed by the amount of money. Lankars called the protagonist over and explained that, since he and Alicia had conquered the dungeon alone, he could not leave him at rank D. As part of the reward, the protagonist would also level up. In another room, some adventurers were going about their lives as usual. The protagonist began to walk among them and mentioned that, although he had recently been promoted to rank D, he had already reached level 52, opening his status card to show it. He commented on how quickly he had reached that level. Elphina was impressed and pointed out that, despite the protagonist facing monsters far above his level, he was still leveling up at an abnormal rate. She thought that normally, once someone reached level 40, their leveling speed would drastically decrease. Suddenly, she looked at the protagonist, who was laughing in her face, and he said that he had finally surpassed her level. Irritated, Alicia opened her own status, showing she was level 45. Elfinha frowned and said that it wasn't funny. Rude, on the other hand, pointed out that it was indeed strange, because although his level was higher, when it came to combat power, Alicia had far more strength. Alicia boasted, saying that level was just an indicator, and in the end, combat power depended on each person's skills and experience. Rude then distractedly watched the door when a group of men, accompanied by a bald old man, entered. The Lord began laughing, saying he was surprised to see the famous Butcher of Miasma from the rumors. Rude grew nervous and asked who he was, pointing out that, apparently, education had passed him by. The old man continued laughing and said that the adventurers from Bologna didn't even know the lord of the neighboring city. Rude was shocked, realizing that if this man was the lord of the neighboring city, he must be the greedy lord of Golar. The lord then asked how they dared to destroy the dungeon and questioned if the dungeon didn't belong to Golar. Rude replied that, the last time he heard, the Abellio dungeon belonged to everyone. The old man explained that the dungeon was on the border between Bologna and Golar, but that Bologna, being so petty, had kicked them out, claiming something strange was happening there. Furthermore, they had caused a monster stampede, and in the end, destroyed the dungeon. People started to get upset, but the Lord continued questioning how they were going to compensate for the lost profits from the dungeon and the damage caused by the monsters in Golar. Alicia stepped in front and asked the Lord to calm down, explaining that such matters should be discussed between guild representatives. She also pointed out that there had been no reports of monsters invading Golar's territory, and that the adventurers from Bologna had already handled the situation, so they had no right to make complaints. The Lord grew angry, unable to argue against her. Rude looked at Alicia with pride, thinking that this was expected from a rank S adventurer, someone who knew how to use words well. Suddenly, the guildmaster from Golar, a blonde idiot, began to speak, saying that the Emerald Storm, named Alicia, had affiliated with Bologna, and that it made sense for someone cursed like her to join such a place. Rude became angry, thinking that this scoundrel was the guildmaster of Golar. The blonde continued saying that this wasn't a matter for mere adventurers to interfere with. The Lord became excited with these words, and as he walked past Elfinha, he commented that she was just a useless survivor from a group that sacrificed themselves for nothing, and that she should stop interfering where she wasn't called, calling her useless trash. Upon hearing this, Elfinha started to lose control and released a massive amount of aura, frightening everyone. The blonde idiot was surprised and thought that he had been intimidated by a girl below level 45. Suddenly, Lankars shouted for everyone to stop. Alicia began to control her aura, but she didn't take her eyes off the blonde. The guildmaster of Bologna then yelled, saying he wouldn't tolerate fights in the guild, and asked the lord and the other guildmaster to accompany him. The blonde started laughing, saying Lankars should keep his dogs on a leash. Rude asked who that trash thought he was. Suddenly, another person appeared out of nowhere, asking if Elfinha remembered him. The protagonist, irritated, asked what it was now, since someone kept appearing all the time. As soon as Alicia saw the man, she remembered that he was Ebert. He held her hand, asking if she remembered him. The protagonist became a bit uncomfortable and asked if she knew him. Alicia explained that Ebert had been part of an old team she used to adventure with. The elf began saying that, back then, he greatly admired Azure Trails, not to mention that Elfinha could use several magic spirits at the same time, and how she fought. As an elf, he couldn't help but see her as an inspiration. He then emphasized that he knew how much she had suffered, which is why he came to Bologna. Looking at her intently, Ebert asked if she would like to join his team. Alicia stared at him, while the protagonist started to get even more irritated seeing this. Ebert continued to look at her, waiting for an answer. Elfinha thanked him for the offer but declined, saying she was already part of a team. She said that this was her partner, and the protagonist extended his hand, introducing himself as Rude. However, Ebert slapped his hand away, surprising both of them. The protagonist remained irritated while Ebert held Elfinha's hand and said that he knew what had happened in the abyssal dungeon and that she had been cursed, but he didn't believe someone like her, a rank S adventurer, would end up in a situation where she was forced to form a team with someone called Butcher of Miasma. Rude became even more upset. Ebert continued, saying that if she joined his team, they would make better use of her skills and experience. She returned the gesture and slapped his hand, angrily telling him to stop saying things he didn't know. Alicia explained that she formed a team with Rude because she wanted to and that any insult against him was a direct insult to her. She emphasized that she appreciated his concern, but the curse cast on her had already been broken. Ebert was stunned and said that the curse on her had come from the Abyssal Dungeon, which was rank SS, and furthermore, it was something caused by a boss from that area. Alicia turned around and said she had gotten lucky. He stood there, not believing what he had heard, while Elfinha winked at the protagonist, thinking it would be bad if his abilities became public, so she preferred to keep it a secret. He smiled and thanked her. Alicia then mentioned that they would update the ranks now, and the protagonist was no longer rank D but was now rank C. Ebert was horrified, wondering why this was the case, especially since he had spent all this time thinking about her. Suddenly, he began to get irritated, thinking that it was Rude who had instigated Alicia. He began to look at both of them and wondered how a rank D adventurer could have defeated the miasma dragon. However, the story would change if Alicia's curse had really been broken. Ebert thought that it was she who had defeated the dragon and that the protagonist was stealing the credit. Rude noticed a strange aura coming from the elf and told Elfina that the guy was looking at him like a lunatic. She explained that elves were very proud and held grudges that grew over their lifetimes. The protagonist stared at her, and Alicia asked what he wanted. Rude smiled and said that she was also an elf, and asked if she was also a proud and prejudiced elf. She responded by asking what he meant, as she considered herself a very humble, intelligent, and charming elf. What she lacked in cuteness, she made up for in strength. Rude thought that she really was proud too. The receptionist says she's heard everything from the guildmaster, smiles, and hands a paper to the protagonist, saying it's a rare occurrence. When Rude looks at it, he's surprised to find that it's a guild certificate confirming he's now rank B. The receptionist explains that he skipped rank C and went straight to B, and they both begin celebrating. She adds that this shows just how difficult the task of conquering the dungeon of Abellio was. She also mentions they received a report from the village they saved, which indicates they also recognized their victory against the Baphomet. The protagonist looks at the certificate and says that he's finally rank B. Suddenly, someone taps Rude on the back, saying that if it were him, he would be even happier. After all, everyone in the city is grateful to him. Magnus and Rigurd were together and smiling. The protagonist gets excited seeing them there. Alicia calls him and says he can't be too happy about his rank B after all. What he's really aiming for is... Rude sighs and says she's right. Happy. He slaps his own face and yells that it's okay, and that he'll climb up to rank S. Ebert then starts calling him, and asks if he really thinks something as stupid as that will be allowed. Rude asks what he's talking about. Ebert says that in order to explore dungeons, a specific rank is required, a rule that ensures safety, but a man who only achieves something by following others gets a rank B. Ebert looks at him with contempt and says that the Guild of Bologna is made up of idiots. All the adventurers present there get nervous. Rude asks what he means. The receptionist says it doesn't matter what he thinks because ranks are given according to the guild's will. Magnus walks over to Ebert and asks if he will take back what he said, or if he wants to get hurt. However, the elf starts laughing, saying that, indeed, they are all idiots. Magnus grabs him and starts swearing at him. Alicia screams for him to stop, but with a simple movement, Ebert throws Magnus away. He falls to the ground, and the elf drives his sword into the ground beside him. With an arrogant tone, Ebert asks if Magnus can stop touching him with those filthy hands. Elfina screams, telling Ebert to stop immediately. He says that she's always been too kind to people, to the point of teaming up with such a deplorable man. She asks why that would be wrong. Ebert admits that elves are prejudiced and says he has a hard time changing his mind once he's made a decision. He starts smiling and says that even an elf as humble, intelligent, and charming as him, as a fellow elf, must show her the correct way. Rude starts laughing, and Ebert asks what he's laughing at. The protagonist thinks that both of them are too proud. The elf says he already knows how to resolve this, since incompetent adventurers are a danger to others. He then says he will test him to see if he's truly worthy of being rank B. The receptionist asks why he's deciding such things on his own, but Alicia says it's fine. She yells that if Ebert doubts the protagonist's abilities, he'll be able to see for himself. They head to the training area of the Bologna Guild. Alicia apologizes to Rude, saying things ended up like this because of her. He smiles and says it's not just her fault, but also his own incompetence. Rude says he just needs to defeat that idiot elf and prove he's worthy of being with her. He starts laughing, saying that in the end, adventurers can only shut others up with violence. People begin to gather to watch the duel. Alicia screams that if either of them gets hurt, she'll step in immediately. Both of them get ready, and the signal is given. Ebert charges forward with full force. Rude is shocked by his speed, but manages to block the attack. The elf smiles and says that the protagonist managed to stop the attack, so he's at least somewhat decent. Ebert continues attacking, again and again. Rude feels pressured, thinking the elf is better than him at swordplay. He also heard Alicia say that Ebert uses both offensive magic and strengthening magic to fight. He's an arcane swordsman. Suddenly, Ebert vanishes and appears behind the protagonist. He delivers a strike that grazes Rude, but he's not satisfied with the attack. Rude keeps staring at Ebert, thinking that he's not able to keep up with his movements. He needs to use his abilities to win, but if he does, the elf begins by saying that he's rank B, and that title is only for those with the strength to wield it. Ebert asks if the protagonist understands that he's not worthy of carrying the rank B title, or of being beside Alicia. Rude admits that the elf is right. With the abilities he currently has, he's not worthy to be by the Elfinha's side. However, it was she who chose him, and because of that, he will prove right here and now that he deserves to be beside her. Alicia smiles upon hearing this, but Ebert does not. Rude begins to use his earth magic, and a giant hand emerges towards the elf. Ebert starts laughing and curses the protagonist, asking if he really thinks he'll defeat an elf using magic. He shoots a fireball at Rude's magic. When they collide, a strong explosion occurs. The people watching are startled, shouting that they are going too far. Ebert starts creating a new spell, saying it's a shame for the miasma butcher. A large amount of energy starts gathering at the ceiling of the room. The elf says that this is the difference between their ranks. Ebert attacks, shouting for Rude to bow before him. The protagonist prepares to take the hit. As all that energy strikes his sword, it starts to be absorbed immediately. The people are confused by this. Ebert is shocked, while Rude says that he knew the elf would try to use magic to defeat him. After all, elves are a proud race. The sword is overflowing with energy. Quickly, Rude charges forward to strike. Ebert manages to defend himself. The two begin exchanging blows, and the elf thinks that Rude's speed and strength are on a completely different level than before. He shouts, asking if that sword is a magic sword. The protagonist replies that he's mistaken, as that sword is cursed. Ebert steps back, confused. He curses Rude, saying this is just another reason not to let Alicia be with him. Ebert begins using his magic, activating his lightning enchantment, an arcane swordsmanship skill. Lightning starts pouring out of his body as he yells that Rude won't be able to match his speed. Like a lightning bolt, he rushes forward, landing a hit on the protagonist. It's the lightning palm. The people are shocked. Ebert starts smiling, saying that in the end, the protagonist is just trash. He asks Elfina to announce the winner, but nothing is decided yet. Rude grabs him by the shirt and starts laughing, apologizing, but the shock doesn't work on him. Ebert screams, saying this is impossible because he should have been paralyzed from such a high voltage. The protagonist headbutts him, making him scream. Ebert falls to the ground as Rude drives his sword into the ground beside him. The protagonist says he didn't mean it, but he's been getting a bit tougher with the falls lately. The adventurers begin cheering, and Alicia smiles at the result. They start entering the arena, saying it's over. Meanwhile, in Lancars's office, he was explaining that the feudal lord was handling some matters in the capital, and he was acting as his substitute. Lancars says he understood Golar's claims, and since they were in charge of the management, they intended to cooperate with the recovery efforts. The Lord says he already knows that, emphasizing that they want compensation, not cooperation, and they want a fair share of the dungeon, since Bologna got greedy and took more than they should have, so now they must pay the price. Suddenly, a girl bursts into the room. The master of the Golar Guild asks what's going on since she didn't even knock. The young girl shouts that it's an emergency, as something strange is happening with the new dungeon of Abellio, which they had already confirmed as completely destroyed. There's a strange energy, and some things are happening. The girl says the area around it is covered by dense mana, and the concentration is rank B. Lancars yells that this is impossible. She adds that 2 gargoyles are guarding the entrance and are blocking any outside interference. Lancars says that, as for Golar's visitors, he doesn't think it's the right time to entertain such useless rumors. The two of them get irritated after hearing this. The leader stands up and says they will organize a subjugation force to leave immediately. He orders the young girl to summon any adventurer of rank B or higher, and especially, Rude must be included in the raid. All the adventurers are called to the master's room. Lancars starts explaining the current situation. They've just confirmed that the dungeon cycle has begun, and they will head to the Abellio dungeon immediately to subjugate it as quickly as possible. Rude asks what that means, and Alicia explains that the cycle is something like an evolution within the dungeon, but it's very rare. She's only heard of it a few times. She says that this time it happened because of the dungeon's collapse, and it's the first time she's dealing with it. The Elfina gets worried since the mana concentration around the area is rank B. The protagonist says that they are also rank B, and besides, there are some rank A individuals, so it's not a problem. Suddenly, Ebert calls the protagonist again and says that it's understandable since he was rank D until recently, which is why Rude doesn't grasp the severity of the situation. The protagonist asks what he means. The elf explains that if the mana concentration around the dungeon is rank B inside the dungeon, it could be at least rank A, or, in the worst case, rank S. Alicia adds that, from what she's heard, the dungeon is constantly evolving, like a cocoon. She explains that when the cocoon emerges, the surface will be flooded with mana, and since Golar and Bologna are close, there's a possibility that both could suffer catastrophic damage. The protagonist starts to think about his city. Suddenly, the master approaches him and tells him not to worry. There have been few cases of dungeon cycles, and there's still a lot of mystery surrounding this phenomenon, so it may not be as serious as it seems. Lankars shows confidence and says that Rude is the one who completed the dungeon, so they would rely on him to lead the others. Rude feels a bit less worried, while Elfinha feels proud of him. Sometime later, at the dungeon's entrance, the two gargoyles are standing guard. People are watching from a distance. Rude uses his eye to analyze them. He sees that both are at level 50 and reports that they are slightly stronger than the beetles they faced. Suddenly, someone kicks a stone, causing noise. That's enough for the gargoyles to hear. Rude thinks they're in trouble now. The two monsters begin to attack the group. One of them uses petrifying breath. Alicia calls Silfieti and orders her to dispel the magic, causing both spells to collide in midair. The other adventurers are impressed, but the attack isn't over yet. The other gargoyle charges forward, but the guild leader punches it in the head, making it sink into the ground. He gets angry and curses the monster, calling it an insect. The remaining gargoyle also charges at the leader. Ramon smiles and finishes off the monster with a single attack. The two guild leaders solve the problem effortlessly. Rude is impressed by their strength. Lankar says it's time to hurry since they don't have time to waste. The protagonist goes over to the other gargoyles and thinks they look edible. He begins to burn the meat. Ramon asks what he's doing, and Rude replies that the monster has regenerative abilities, so he's finishing it off. Ramon turns around and begins to leave as the protagonist puts some of the meat in his bag. Inside the dungeon, they note that there doesn't seem to be as much miasma as before, and the nature of the dungeon has changed. Rude says the shape hasn't changed much, but Alicia says they can't let their guard down because they don't know what's happening in the lower layers. She emphasizes that even though the shape hasn't changed, the monsters will be more powerful than before. The group encounters some monsters ahead. Lankar says the big one is his, while the others can choose any of the smaller ones to face. Ramon uses his ability, Warrior's Honor, and the adventurers receive a magic that boosts their attacks. The monsters charge, but the adventurers begin defeating them with ease. Elfinha gets excited and calls the protagonist to join them as well. When she looks at him, the protagonist is irritated, as the abnormal status nullification cancelled out the Warrior's Honor he had received as assistance. Lankars begins to draw his weapon from his bag, and with the help of Ramon's aura, he is ready for battle. The monster starts to attack him, but the guildmaster notices an opening, and with just one strike, ends the fight. Rude remains standing while the others continue fighting. The Elfinha keeps watching him. He is still irritated because his unique ability also nullifies support magic. More monsters start to appear. The metal-headed one says he will gather all of them and uses his provocation ability to draw the attention of all nearby monsters. They charge at the adventurer, who starts laughing and uses his barrier of interception ability, shouting for all of them to explode. He shouts for his teammates to attack now. Quickly, the two rush into battle. Ebert, with his incredible speed, defeats all those in his path. The girl known as X-23 also attacks the monsters, defeating them with ease. She says these monsters are hard to analyze, as it's not easy to find their weaknesses. One of the mages, named Titus, shouts that they should just attack with everything they have, and they'll resolve the situation. He and Milim attack together and manage to clear the area. Ramon observes all of this. The metal-headed one says that his provocation will soon end and warns everyone to be careful. However, the ground beneath his feet begins to crack, and a huge monster appears in front of him. The monster grabs him, making him scream that there was one underground. But with a precise attack, Milim destroys the monster. Axe turns around and says that the attack almost hit him, and asks her to be more careful next time. The protagonist watches all this, and thinks they are strong, and moreover, their teamwork is perfect, which makes it hard to believe they are an improvised group. He starts to get irritated because he hasn't been able to help at all. Some injured monsters look at the body of the bigger monster and begin to merge with each other. Rude realizes this and thinks that in fact, these smaller monsters are just parasites. The protagonist gets excited, thinking that now is his moment, and starts using earth magic. The two mages observe. Rude shoots his attack at the monster, but it sees and creates a magic circle that absorbs the stone magic. Rude is impressed and uses his eye to analyze the situation. He sees that the monster has earth removal abilities, and its nature is composed of debris and earth. Ramon arrives behind the monster and defeats it with a simple movement, saying that the best way to deal with a parasite is always to strike its head. Ramon comments that even so, he never imagined that Rude would use earth magic against a monster that came from the ground. He says that's a huge folly, not to mention that the protagonist even nullified the warrior's honor. Rude feels uncomfortable with this, thinking that Ramon is right, since he lacks experience working in such a diverse group and can't rely on his teammates' support magic. This makes him feel like nothing more than a burden. Suddenly, Ebert calls him out, questioning whether he's unable to keep up with the battle. He says that teamwork should be the foundation of any adventurer, and that while the protagonist might think he won, in the end, he's not suited for that group. Ebert notices that both Rude and the Elfinja are already at their limits with him. However, a huge explosion occurs, catching everyone's attention. They shout for Lankars, but he replies that he is fine. The master then says that the most important thing is that the monster is parasitizing the bodies of their own companions. Lankars says the creature's wounds regenerated, and in addition, its fighting power has increased. Ramon, with sarcasm, says that thanks to this, now they'll only have to deal with one monster. He jokes, saying he'll give a little help to those in need, but then he feels something sting him. He slaps his hand down and, when he looks, is horrified to see that it's a monster. Ramon begins to turn to stone, thinking that their main objective was to have the insects inject petrification poison into them. Everyone is affected by the mosquitoes, and the monster is now free to attack them. In just a few seconds, the entire group is completely petrified. The monster approaches them, creating a blade in its hand, preparing to deliver the final blow. Lankars accepts his fate, saying it's a shame, but at the last second, Rude uses his web manipulation and manages to pull him out of the attack just in time. The monster is confused, as the protagonist had rescued everyone in his group, thanks to his unique ability that prevents him from being affected by anything. Rude starts laughing and says that now is his moment. He touches the Elfinja and frees her. Alicia is happy and thanks him, and the protagonist replies that it's time to act. He uses his eye again and notices that the monster is level 66. He tells her that the monster has no protection against magic, so she should attack and break its posture, and then he will do the rest. Alicia summons her spirits and begins attacking with everything she has. The monster sees the attack, but can't dodge it and is hit directly. It falls to the ground, but both Rude and Alicia are confused as the monster's face changes positions and it starts reshaping itself, taking on a different form. The Elfinja says that it's disgusting. The beast sends multiple insects to attack, but Rude pushes her back and shouts that this time, he's going to explode them all at once. He uses his lightning cloak and takes out all the insects. Lankars, even though he's turned to stone, watches the scene but can't do anything. The monster begins to move to attack again, and the two prepare for another battle. Alicia gathers her magic and hits the monster with an earth attack, sending it flying. Rude uses instant step to advance and strike. The beast, now high in the air, begins to change form once again and turns, managing to dodge the attack. Rude gets irritated. The monster takes advantage of the protagonist's lowered guard and attacks. The Elfinja shouts for him to be careful. Lankars moves beside her with incredible speed and lands a powerful blow on the monster, saving Rude. The attack is so strong that it sends the monster flying, creating a hole in the wall. The protagonist is surprised and asks how Lankars managed to escape the petrification. Lankars replies that he circulated magic throughout his body and thanks Rude for buying him time. The monster begins to rise. Lankars says that now they need to end this once and for all. The protagonist asks the master to leave it to him. Rude begins to imbue his sword with mana. The beast lets out a great roar and charges at them again. The protagonist, his gaze fixed on the creature's movements, delivers a powerful strike that manages to finish the monster off. Parts of the monster begin to fall to the ground. Rude looks at his sword and thinks that, it seems, he can now control the amount of mana he imbues in it. The monster is in pieces on the ground. Alicia screams, but the protagonist says that he already knows. As thorns emerge from his hand, Rude affirms that he will not let this damn creature regenerate again. He begins to shoot the poisonous spikes he took from the dragon, hitting the monster that was already on the ground. Every piece of the monster starts to groan in pain. The Elfinja says that the poison is degrading faster than its regeneration. She adds that, If it weren't for the protagonist's immunity, the battle against the dragon would have been even more dangerous. Lankars calls the protagonist and asks if he plans to reveal his secret to everyone. He looks at everyone and asks what he should do, since he won't be able to get away with it without a proper explanation. Alicia agrees, saying that, besides, they wouldn't be able to keep this secret for much longer. Rude agrees, but says that he needs to heal everyone with the replacement. Sometime later, once everyone is healed, Rude finishes telling everything that happened. Lankar says it's hard to believe, but after seeing the protagonist fight, Ebert interrupts the master, saying that this is amazing. He grabs Rude's hand and says that, in all his life, this is the first time he has witnessed a miracle like that. The protagonist asks if it wasn't him who was saying that Rude wasn't suited to be an adventurer. Ebert tells the protagonist not to mind the details, as now he sees that Rude is worthy to accompany Alicia. Milam asks if the protagonist can really eat monsters. Rude is a bit surprised by everyone's reaction. He takes several pieces from his bag and says that yes, asking if they would mind if he cooked a bit right there.
Quickly, the dishes start to be ready, and Rude explains that they first needed to cook on low heat until the sides were fully done. After that, they had to get rid of the strong smell with herbs. The adventurers are surprised to see how he cooks. Everyone looks at the protagonist, who enjoys the food, imagining how delicious it must be. Rude starts talking about the texture and smell of the mole cricket, saying they are also very good, and mentions that gargoyles are crispy on the outside and juicy on the inside. One of the adventurers comments to his companion that the smell is really good, but his companion warns him not to be fooled just by the appearance. Milam also starts salivating at the sight of that wonderful dish. Ramon observes the protagonist and comments that all of this is quite peculiar. He asks if the protagonist can also recover his magic by eating. Rude is impressed that he noticed, but explains that it is not magic but mana. This leaves the other guild leader slightly confused. He is surprised to discover that it is mana, as it does not emanate an evil smell like that of demons. On the contrary, it seems divine. Ramon calls Lankars and says they don't have much information about the monsters in this dungeon, questioning whether they should retreat and wait for reinforcements. However, the guild leader states that this is not a good option, since the longer they delay, the more the dungeon's cycle will progress. He looks at the protagonist, who is happily thanking for the food, and emphasizes that they have been blessed with reliable companions. Therefore, they themselves will conquer that dungeon. After everyone agrees, they continue advancing and comment that if the topography has not changed, they are very close to the boss room. As soon as the protagonist and the elf enter a room, they are stunned because right in front of them is all the rubble from the collapse they had forgotten about. Lankars looks at the blocked passage and says that even after traveling all that way, they will have no choice but to turn back. However, Rude remembers that at an earlier moment, he used magic to solve the petrification problem of his friends. He tries the same now, placing his hands on the rocks and saying, "Removal of soil and earth." All the rubble before them starts to make noise and glow, leaving Alicia shocked and Abert amazed, while Ramon cannot believe what he is seeing. Everything blocking the passage simply vanishes, and the boss room, which was just ahead, is now accessible. The protagonist gets excited and tells everyone that this is the moment. They keep moving forward and enter the room. Rude and the elf are once again impressed because right before them is a gigantic egg. Lankars begins to explain that it is the egg of the wise dragon. The protagonist interrupts and asks what this wise dragon is. The old man continues speaking and emphasizes that he has only seen it in books, mentioning that it cyclically permeates between life and death. When the dragon is destroyed, its soul reincarnates and is reborn, using the dungeon as an incubator. The adventurers look at it, unable to believe what they are hearing. Lankars explains that even if its body is defeated, the wisdom of its soul will not disappear. Additionally, the guildmaster highlights that he has heard that the dragon also understands human language, shocking everyone even more. He concludes his explanation by saying that all the wisdom accumulated in this dragon allows it to foresee the future. Axe steps forward, saying that none of this matters because, in the end, it is just an egg. He uses his physical strength enhancement ability and, without hesitation, charges forward, shouting that they can simply put an end to it before the egg hatches. Lankars tries to stop him, shouting for him to wait, but it is too late. Axe is hit directly, and the impact is so strong that it wounds him and sends him flying. His companion asks if he is okay. The young man looks ahead as he hears some noises and shouts that the egg is moving. Several tentacles start emerging from the egg. They realize they have been careless. Lankars explains that this is the egg's instinct for self-preservation and warns everyone to stay back for now because even though it is just an egg, it is still a dragon. Rude uses his ability to analyze the creature but cannot discover its status. warning that they are completely obscured. The masked man approaches the leader and suggests that everyone retreat, emphasizing that perhaps the best choice is to wait for reinforcements. Ramon continues analyzing the situation and states that once the egg hatches, it will not matter how many S-class adventurers they have. Stopping the dragon will be impossible. Landkars grips his spear and with his gaze fixed on the dragon, declares that he will put an end to this here and now, but he will need everyone's help. Without hesitation, the mages begin their attack. The attacks hit the egg, causing a slight distraction. Landkars takes advantage of this and advances. He notices an attack coming his way but manages to leap and prepare to strike. With a single blow, he cuts off one of the monster's tentacles. The protagonist is pleased to see this, but the monster screams in pain, and something starts happening to the severed tentacle. Within seconds, another tentacle appears in its place. They shout that the monster is regenerating at an extreme speed. Even Landkars is surprised and wonders how the monster can regenerate so quickly. The guildmaster looks at the protagonist and says he needs to ask for a favor. As soon as the monster sees the protagonist, it emits a deafening noise, forcing everyone to cover their ears. The old man reveals his plan and the protagonist agrees. With that, he swiftly charges at the monster, dodging an attack and slicing off one of its tentacles. The monster keeps attacking, but he manages to evade. At least, that's what he thought. The monster used one tentacle as a distraction while another grabbed hold of his leg. Landkars is shocked and surprised, realizing that if the tentacle had been just a bit faster, he would have been in great danger. However, in the blink of an eye, Ebert and Ramon charge forward fearlessly, cutting all the tentacles that were restraining Landkars. He is surprised by their actions and thanks them. The guild leader fights bravely against the monster. With so many attacks landing, the egg finally loses balance and falls to the ground. Alicia shouts that now is the time. The monster inside the egg glares at them, and Rude yells that he now wants to see if it can withstand his sword imbued with magic. He leaps, channeling all his energy and strength into a single strike, splitting the egg in half effortlessly. Landkars and Ebert are impressed. The egg begins to open, but the protagonist is shocked to see that the monster inside remains intact. Alicia notices this too and calls upon Sylphide's power. Combining both forces, she releases an incredible amount of energy, striking the monster. The other adventurers are astonished. However, as the dust begins to settle, they see that the egg remains intact and fully regenerated. Ramon shouts that they are getting nowhere with this fight, but before he can even finish speaking, he feels a menacing presence. The others sense it too and start questioning what is happening. Suddenly, the egg begins to glow and a deafening noise erupts from within. The adventurers notice that the egg looks different, and the monster inside moves strangely. The elf states that the wise dragon is about to be born. Seeing this, Landkars shouts that they are out of time and must end this now, emphasizing that they must finish the dragon with a powerful attack. He explains that the opponent's regenerative power is a huge threat, but all the tentacles are fragile. The old man says they need to attack together to create a large opening. Everyone agrees, coordinates where to strike, and charges at the monster. The dragon's egg does not remain still and begins launching spikes to hinder the adventurers. Milam uses her magic barrier, to protect Landkars. She looks at him and says she will shield him, so he just needs to focus on his attack. The old man thanks her and begins using his skill, Charge. This ability strengthens the user's next attack with magic, doubling its power. Alicia notices that the guildmaster has activated his skill and asks the protagonist how they will coordinate the destruction of all the tentacles. Rude tells her not to worry and to leave everything to him. Suddenly, the protagonist uses his skill, Command, connecting with all the adventurers at once. Ebert and Milam are delighted and surprised to learn that the protagonist has this ability since they can now hear him inside their minds. Using telepathy, he instructs everyone to destroy the tentacles when the countdown ends. The adventurers agree, the countdown begins, and everyone prepares. As soon as it reaches 1, they strike simultaneously, successfully severing all the monster's tentacles. Thanks to this, the egg falls to the ground and the monster remains motionless. Landkars looks back and shouts to the master that now is the time to attack. Having already gathered an immense amount of energy, he unleashes another skill called Absolute Void. The attack is so powerful that it destroys the central part of the egg. The monster collapses to the ground and everyone stands still, watching. Landkars raises his weapon in celebration, but he is so weak that he begins to lose his balance. Ramon goes to him and holds him up, saying that he hates to admit it, but if they hadn't fought together, it would have been impossible to defeat that monster. Landkars sighs in relief and says that even in this situation, Ramon remains arrogant. The other adventurers begin celebrating, saying that their comrades are no longer in danger. The protagonist starts laughing and raises his hand in victory as they had won. While everyone celebrates, the masked man stands behind the monster, thinking that this group is truly cheerful. However, now is the time to collect the wise dragon's magic stone, as it will bring him a fortune. He begins searching everywhere but cannot find it. As he keeps looking, a tentacle from the monster emerges from the ground behind him without him noticing. The moment he hears the sound, he quickly turns around, but the attack is already upon him. The monster strikes him, sending him flying. He crashes to the ground, screaming in pain. The wise dragon regenerates and, now standing, says that, in the end, it wasn't completely useless. The dragon begins walking, stating that its body won't last much longer, so it must wait until its next regeneration. Looking at the protagonist, it declares that before that happens, all the worms who dared to disturb its regeneration will meet their end here and now. Ramon senses the presence of something threatening and immediately goes on guard, saying that it's not over yet, as he can still feel a monster's presence. When everyone looks ahead, they see the beast, wise dragon Orpheus. The protagonist tries to analyze it with his eye but can only see that the dragon is at level 1, while all its other characteristics are blurred. People begin questioning how it is still alive. Alicia comments that it seems like, at the moment of the attack, the beast buried itself underground to escape. The wise dragon claims that mere humans dare to challenge the gods, calling them insolent beings. Rude is astonished to see the dragon speak. Landkars explains that true dragons, the highest-ranking beings of the dragon race, are closer to divinity and therefore are capable of understanding human language. The wise dragon looks at the protagonist and says it senses a hateful impurity within him, emphasizing that, although he appears human, can also see him as a monster. The beast rises and challenges the protagonist to face it, telling him to do his best to entertain it, but warning that in the end, he will tremble in despair. A bit further away, Milim is concentrating her magic but realizes she won't be able to hold it much longer. Gathering all her strength, she uses her ability Shadow Mantle. This skill conceals her form, engulfing her in darkness. With that, Milim vanishes before everyone's eyes. Suddenly, one of the monster's arms falls off, and it observes itself, saying that it is starting to fall apart. Titus looks shocked and states that the dragon is rotting. The guildmaster says that if they are going to attack, now is the time. Landkars thinks that he just unleashed a powerful attack and, if possible, would like to wait a little to recover. But he doesn't have that time. Axe stares at the wise dragon before him and asks what kind of monster it is. With a fearful expression, he says he can no longer fight and begins to run, declaring that he is getting out of there. However, the dragon notices and begins using its powers, asking if Axe really thinks he can escape. The monster uses telekinesis to lift all the surrounding pillars and hurls them toward the exit. The passage becomes completely blocked. The dragon tells Axe that he will not escape, and asks if he really believes that, even with only one hand, it won't be able to exterminate a rat. Landkars grips his spear once more and declares that if they can't escape, they will show how terrifying cornered rats can be. All the adventurers charge toward the monster and attack. However, their strikes are not very effective, as the monster defends and evades with ease. The protagonist keeps attacking with everything he has, but realizes that none of his attacks are landing. The elf feels the same way, thinking that it is as if the wise dragon is predicting their movements. The monster glares at them menacingly and asks if that is all they have, demanding that they entertain it more. The dragon uses its ability Skybreaker, and its roar is so powerful that it pushes all the adventurers away. Alicia, worried about the protagonist, rushes to him and asks if he is hurt. He responds that he is fine, but that in the last battle he used up almost all of his mana. The elf stares at the monster and shouts to Rudy that she will end this in an instant with her Spirit Quintet, asking him to warn everyone. Using his command ability, Rude reconnects with all the adventurers and informs them that she is about to unleash her most powerful attack. So when the time comes, everyone must synchronize with him. Alicia begins to focus and calls upon all the spirits, asking them to lend her their strength. Meanwhile, the adventurers fight with everything they have to distract the wise dragon. As soon as the spirits are ready, she shouts to Rude, who informs everyone that the moment has come. With the power of all the spirits, she unleashes Spirit Quintet, her most powerful ability. A tremendously powerful energy beam shoots toward the dragon, which merely watches. The explosion is so intense that even the adventurers are thrown back. Ebert, struggling to see due to the brightness, asks if they succeeded. However, the dragon is still standing, and Ramon laments, saying that unfortunately they failed. The monster extends its hand toward the elf, stating that, as expected, it let its guard down. Alicia stares at the creature, but before she can react, the guildmaster leaps in with his spear, attempting to put an end to it. The monster notices his presence and, with a single strike, sends him flying. Titus sees this and panics. He attempts to use his skill, binding, and several roots emerge from the ground, restraining the monster's body. Abert takes advantage of the situation and attacks the dragon from behind, but once again the creature reacts, turning and biting the elf's sword. Abert is shocked, as he was certain he had struck the beast's blind spot, yet it still managed to counter. With another blow, the monster hurls the elf away. Titus remains in front of the dragon, which begins breaking free from the restraints. As it uses its powers, it asks if Titus truly believed that would be enough to hold it down. Using telekinesis once again, it creates a sphere of stone and launches it at Titus. Alicia sees everyone fallen and falls into despair, thinking that because of her weakness, everything will end the same way as before. She recalls her former companions and feels, once again, that she has failed to protect them. The wise dragon rises before her and says that she has its respect, but even so, it will put an end to everything. It begins approaching, declaring that she must become food for its wisdom. Paralyzed by fear, Alicia watches as the monster advances, its gaze locked onto her. Rude starts thinking that they cannot win this way. He wonders if, at the very least, they could stall the wise dragon long enough to escape through the magic circle at the dungeon's core. Maybe then they would have a chance to flee. He attempts to use his web manipulation ability, but is surprised to find that it does not activate. Confused, he questions whether he has run out of mana. Meanwhile, the dragon continues attacking his companions. The protagonist observes the situation and realizes that if he cannot gather mana again, they will all be destroyed. Looking to the side, he sees the egg where the monster was and even unwillingly knows exactly what he must do. The wise dragon unleashes its dragon breath, and Alicia, stepping forward, uses Sylphide to create a barrier and block the attack. Ramon seizes the opening and uses his skill, Airblade, but once again, the beast defends itself with its magic processing. The dragon then starts using Water Bullet and Air Slash simultaneously, putting the adventurers under immense pressure. Gasping for breath, Ramon thinks that the monster's variety of abilities is irritating. The beast glares at the two and asks what they think of its next ability. Suddenly, it begins gathering a massive amount of energy in the palm of its hand. Ramon observes and asks if that is Landkars's Absolute Void ability. Analyzing the scene, he realizes that this is the power of the dragon's wisdom. However, he knows the weaknesses of this attack and shouts, warning everyone that while the ability is charging, the dragon is defenseless. If they want to strike, now is the time. Alicia prepares to support him and begins summoning her spirits, Urdale and Wakyan. With their help, she imbues Ramon's sword with water and lightning, creating the Lightning Water Blade. Ramon is impressed and charges at the monster with his empowered sword. However, this was exactly what the wise dragon wanted. Ramon delivers his attack, but the dragon dodges and counterattacks. Ramon realizes too late that it was a trap. The monster's strike lands directly, gravely wounding him. The elf is in shock, as she sees yet another of her companions being struck down, collapsing right before her. Trembling, she starts murmuring that they don't stand a chance. Suddenly, Urdeel begins drifting away from her. The dragon is using its telekinesis to steal the spirit, remarking that such a rare entity makes it curious about its taste. Alicia reaches out, pleading for the wise dragon not to do this. However, it completely ignores her plea and simply devours the spirit. The elf, who was already drained, is now utterly broken. She falls to her knees before the monster, murmuring that this cannot be happening to her. The beast extends its hand towards the elf and, with chilling coldness, states that charge techniques should only be used against more powerful opponents. Explaining that first, one creates an opening and then delivers an attack with immense force. He grabs her by the collar and says there is no need to use such a technique against mere rats. The monster asks if she knows why he used such a dishonest technique, and explains that he did it just to see the despair in her eyes. Alicia couldn't take it anymore. She had lost her companions in the past and was now reliving it all again. Tears start streaming down her face. The wise dragon crouches down and asks if it's time to savor an elf. He opens his mouth, moving closer to her, who remains completely motionless. But at the last second, the protagonist appears and lands a punch on the wise dragon's face, sending it flying and saving his companion. Alicia is shocked to see Rude's condition. He is exuding a red aura with darker tones. Suddenly, consumed by that fury, he starts screaming. One of the wise dragon's eyes falls, and the monster complains that its incomplete body is already falling apart. The beast stares at the protagonist and says that he ate the eggshell, turning himself into a monster. The protagonist begins laughing uncontrollably as he feels an immense amount of mana coursing through his body, admitting that he can no longer control himself. Alicia runs to him, shouting and asking if he is okay. However, the protagonist turns and slaps her, throwing her forcefully against the wall. She falls, calling his name weakly, but his rage is focused solely on one being. The wise dragon gets up and states that the protagonist has absorbed an excessive amount of mana, turning into a complete monster. This was intriguing, but he points out that Rude won't last long, so it might not even be worth wasting time on him. The protagonist keeps growling in anger, feeling his body burn as if he's going insane. He knows he won't hold out. Suddenly, a voice emerges from the darkness. Milim appears and says that the protagonist's mana control is completely disorganized. Releasing her aura and smiling, she claims she will lend a hand and uses her touch ability. Instantly, Rude begins to regain control over his mana. The rage and chaos he felt simply vanish, and now he can feel the mana flowing in harmony with his body. Even the wise dragon is surprised by this. Milim picks up a sword and hands it to him, saying that now is his chance to finish off that lizard with one foot in the grave. Rude looks at her, surprised, and asks who she really is. The wise dragon, outraged, asks if she really just called him a lizard and claimed he was on the brink of death, emphasizing that she should not mock a god. Furious, he charges at Milim. She starts laughing, saying that apparently the bookworm dragon can't handle a simple joke. The protagonist steps in front of the dragon's attack and with a swift movement, effortlessly slices it in half. Milim cheers excitedly, shouting that he landed a hit kill. After the battle ended, everyone was injured, and Rude began trying to heal them. He used his web manipulation for first aid, but the wounds were too deep. Milim looked at him and said that only the two of them escaped unscathed, while the rest were severely injured, and that if they didn't take care of it soon. Looking at everyone, she commented that it would be difficult to carry so many people out of there. Then she asked what they should do, questioning whether they should wait for reinforcements, carry each person to the city, or seek help. Suddenly, the Prota started feeling something and screamed with intense pain in his chest. Milim looked at him and said that the side effects had finally appeared. She explained that she had forcibly controlled his mana to strengthen him, but his body was at its limit. Suddenly, the divine wise dragon started cursing, surprising the two of them. He said that he wouldn't let them leave unscathed, that he would at least take everyone with him, and began bleeding from his eyes. A loud noise was heard and the whole place started shaking. The Prota looked up and asked if the dungeon was really collapsing. Milim also looked up and said that the dragon was acting as a substitute for the dungeon's core. She shouted that they needed to get out of there immediately. However, the Prota noticed something and saw that a giant rock was about to hit Alicia. He ran, trying to reach her, shouting her name. A loud noise was heard and dense dust began to disperse. Rude sighed in relief with Alicia in his arms. She began to wake up and with a weak voice called his name. He said that he had managed to defeat the wise dragon and that now they only needed to escape the dungeon. Alicia started to say that she understood, but she could barely speak due to coughing. Rude became concerned and asked if she was okay. Gasping for breath, she said she couldn't move because she had run out of mana. Seeing that there was no other option, she lowered her gaze and asked the Prota to leave her there and run. The Prota criticized her decision, asking what kind of story that was, and started thinking that all of this was his fault. Milim turned to them and called out, saying that if they didn't hurry, they would be buried alive. The Prota yelled at her, saying he couldn't just run away because those who break the rules are like trash, but those who abandon their friends are worse than trash. Milim stared at him and started walking away, saying that she had liked him, but he had made the wrong choice. The Prota couldn't believe what he saw and thought that if things continued like this, they would really be buried alive. Therefore, he had to make a sad decision, carry only the elf and get out of there. But he couldn't do it. He thought of all the people who had helped and given their lives for that mission, and wondered if he should really abandon them all. Rude refused to do it and began questioning if there was another way, a way to save everyone. Alicia started speaking again, pleading for him to run away. The Prota became irritated and asked why she was saying that again. She screamed, telling him to flee immediately, and with tears in her eyes said that this was what his companions wanted. That left the Prota speechless and shocked. The old man also started to get up and told the Prota to run away. The guildmaster explained that if he wanted to continue this adventurer's life, there would be many times when he would lose his companions. Landkars also started shouting, questioning if those who could survive didn't survive. What good would the lives of the dead do? Once again, the Prota was at a loss for words. Amid all the chaos, monsters started to appear, and the Prota, without hesitation, grabbed his sword. Several monsters began surrounding the exit. Abert also managed to get up and surprise the Prota, saying that the dungeon monsters were gathering there. Seeing that his companions were fighting for their lives or protecting someone, he decided that he wouldn't let anyone die. No one would die there. He positioned himself in front of the monsters, but Alicia kept screaming for him to flee. One of the monsters charged at him, but he cut it down without hesitation and screamed, with hatred in his heart, saying that he wouldn't flee because they had always called him a lamb and always belittled him. He told Alicia that when she invited him to join her team and accepted his secret, those were the moments he had felt happiest in his life. This left her stunned, with tears in her eyes. The Prota continued speaking and shouted that when the guild accepted him, That was also one of the moments he had felt happiest. Now that he finally had companions who trusted him, now that he had the recognition of everyone, he couldn't just abandon them and run away. He kept fighting with all his strength and remembered his past, the great adventurer who had saved him in his childhood. The adventurer's words echoed in his mind. Listen well, kid. No matter how hard or painful it gets, never. Rude continued fighting, destroying all the monsters around him while shouting that he would never give up. Alicia was moved after hearing all of this, but they felt an overwhelming presence. Ebert looked ahead and asked, "Is that?" The wise dragon was standing once again, using the dungeon's monsters to heal his body. The Proto kept shouting that he wouldn't give up. The dragon let out a fierce roar towards him and tried to attack, but Rude managed to dodge and prepared to counterattack. However, the dragon opened its mouth, and its tongue transformed into another mouth that lunged at the Proto, biting his arm and making his sword fall. Alicia started screaming desperately when she saw the situation, but all the Proto could think was that he wouldn't give up. He used his high slash skill and left his own arm behind. Fallen to the ground, he quickly got up, grabbed his sword thinking that he wouldn't give up, and used his regeneration skill, instantly creating a new arm. He gripped his sword tightly, even surprising the wise dragon, and charged with all his strength, shouting until he landed a blow. With the sword embedded in the wise dragon's body, the Proto used his Thunder Mantle skill, causing a powerful shock. The Proto thought that now the monster would fall, that it couldn't resist anymore, but the wise dragon stayed on his feet and started repeating the word annihilate over and over. With one of his claws, he struck the Proto, throwing him away. However, someone caught him. As soon as Rude looked up, he was surprised. It was the same man, the great adventurer, the hero of his childhood, standing before his eyes, telling him that he had done a good job. With a smile on his face, he asked the Proto to relax, as everyone there would return alive. The mysterious adventurer looked at the wise dragon and said that he had failed to reincarnate and ended up being parasitized by other monsters. A shame. The dragon became enraged upon hearing this and began using its skill, bringing up roots to trap them. Rude observed and thought that this was not good, but with just one move the hero cut all the roots. The dragon charged to try to punch, but the adventurer with no effort managed to rival its strength. The adventurer called the dragon by name, Orphis, and asked if he remembered him from the life and death battle they had 5 years ago. He explained that, in the divine form the dragon once possessed, he had pushed his team to the limit, but now, looking at the present, it was clear how far he had fallen. Orphis, angry, shouted at the adventurer to shut up while releasing his aura. In a second, the adventurer cut the dragon in half, leaving the Proto in awe of how incredible he was. The adventurer continued cutting down all the monsters that were with the dragon, and Rude just watched, thinking that this was the strength of an S-level adventurer. The dungeon kept collapsing, and the Proto looked back to see that Alicia was in danger. He shouted to try and help her, but she was out of his reach. Suddenly, another adventurer appeared and used her Frozen Inferno skill, freezing everything around and protecting Alicia. She looked around and asked where all that ice had come from, as it was enough to stop the dungeon from collapsing. The ice adventurer asked what kind of bizarre monster that was, saying that everything there was disgusting. The mysterious adventurer thanked Selena for her help, but she didn't care, and started arguing with Leonis, saying that he was still reckless as always for advancing like that. The Proto was confused about how those people had arrived there, and more adventurers kept entering. Another member of the group said that he couldn't agree more with Selena. Suddenly, she looked to the side and saw Rude and Alicia kneeling on the ground. She ran to Alicia and greeted her, saying that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. Selena looked at the elf and said that her condition was terrible. She shouted at the healer to hurry and heal everyone. The healer got ready and began using his sacred light of healing skill. He spread the light throughout the dungeon, and the wounded adventurers began saying that all the pain they had been feeling was simply disappearing. Ebert was impressed to see such a large healing range. The healer approached Ramon and noticed that his condition was a little worse than the others. However, he extended his hand and began using Soul Seal Restoration. Ramon, who had been groaning in pain, was now able to sleep peacefully. The healer stood up, saying that he had healed everyone's wounds, but they were still without stamina and energy, so he asked everyone to rest. He looks to the side and says that, unfortunately, he can't revive those who have already lost their souls. Leonis smiles and says that now it's time to leave this place. He asks the adventurers who can't walk to lean on someone, and everyone starts helping each other. Rude begins to smile and helps his companion walk. She also smiles and nods at him. When he looks to the side, he sees the rest of the wise dragon lying on the ground. Taking advantage of everything being frozen, Leonis says that now everyone is going home. Sometime later, outside the dungeon, they set up camp and light a fire. Leonis holds an orb in his hand and explains that it's a fragment of the soul of the dragon Orphis, and that it should recover after a few years and then revive. Leonis also shares that they, from the Lion Wings of Light group, had already defeated this dragon 5 years ago, and the collected soul has been kept safe in the capital. Lankars hears the story and asks why the dragon revived in such a remote city like Bologna. The adventurer explains that recently the royal vault was robbed by someone, which leaves the old man alarmed. Leonis states that the resurrection of the dragon this time was thanks to an artificial dungeon anomaly created by someone. Lankars remains stunned upon hearing this, not knowing what to say. Meanwhile, Selena and the elf were talking. She says that if Alicia had joined her group, they would be equivalent to an army. The elf is very happy to hear this, but she says that her level has decreased, and now her goals are different. That battle in the dungeon made her realize how weak she still is. Selena doesn't fully agree and just observes. Rude also observes from afar, not agreeing with what he heard, but says nothing. Selena starts laughing and says that Alicia has always been like this, never changing her mind once she makes a decision. The elf smiles and thanks her for the intention and also for the invitation. Selena asks the elf to take a look at her team members and yells that they have a selfish leader, a muscle brain who doesn't say anything, and a 2-meter nerd. She starts to complain, saying that there are only men in the team, and that annoys her. Leonis approaches and asks her to be quiet for a moment as she was making Alicia's partner uncomfortable with all of that. The Prota doesn't say anything, just looks at his hero. He gathers courage, stands up, walks over to everyone, and looks directly at Leonis, beginning to say that when he was a child something happened in a village to the east, emphasizing that the adventurer saved his life. Rude begins shouting that maybe Leonis doesn't remember, but on that day, he became his hero. Leonis lowers his head and says that he understands, and it seems he really was that boy. With a smile on his face, he looks at the Prota and asks if he has never given up. Selena is surprised to learn that the Prota was that boy, and comments that they could have saved more villagers if they had arrived earlier. However, Leonis has regretted it ever since. The healer explains that this is why their leader is so important now, and that because of that he also became a problem for the team. Leonis extends his hand and tells the Prota that it was thanks to him that the damage from the dungeon anomaly was minimized, emphasizing that he has become a great adventurer. They shake hands, and Rude says that he doesn't deserve such praise but thanks him. Lankars interrupts them and calls the Prota. He explains that, given the recent commotion in the capital and considering that Bologna needs to strengthen its defenses, he's thinking about establishing a new guard unit. The guildmaster says that he would like the Prota to be the captain of this team and asks what he thinks. Rude is so shocked that he doesn't know what to say. Leonis is surprised by the proposal, while Selena just smiles, watching him. Alicia is also shocked to hear this. The Prota thanks for the offer, but says that he must decline. Lankars looks at him, as this wasn't the answer he expected, but says that he understands and will respect this decision. He asks why he is refusing. Rude lowers his gaze and says that during the operation to conquer that dungeon, he realized how unprepared he was. In the end, he was the only one standing, and even then, it wasn't enough. He starts clenching his fists in anger and states that, without strength, he won't be able to protect his companions. Alicia watches in silence until the Prota yells, calling for Leonis. He says that he became an adventurer because he admires the type of adventurer Leonis is. The Prota emphasizes that he knows he is still far from reaching the level Leonis currently possesses, but with conviction and an absurd willpower, he shouts that he will definitely become stronger and that one day they will fight together. He turns to the elf and promises her that they will also conquer the Abyss dungeon. She smiles and taps his hand, saying she can't wait for that moment, calling him her partner. Lankars sighs and says that apparently they both already have their own goals. Rude explains that he's planning to leave Bologna and start a journey to further evolve his power. The healer suddenly appears behind him and says that it's fascinating. The Prota gets scared, but the healer states that the energy he possesses is different from conventional magic. It's magical essence. A magical essence taking root in the human body should be impossible. He continues looking at the Prota's face and asks if he's been eating monsters. After hearing this, everyone in the team is startled, and Selena yells for everyone to step back because the Prota might be dangerous. Immediately, she creates ice crystals and points them at Rude. She continues shouting, demanding that he answer the question and confirm if what the healer said is true. She brings the crystals closer to the Prota's head and says that depending on the answer, however, the healer begins to get nervous and uses his powers to control the roots, making several sprout around Selena and trapping her. She starts grumbling inside and he asks her to calm down a bit. She manages to poke her head out and screams, asking why he's doing this, pointing out that as a brother, he's the biggest drum of them all, stressing that the Prota is not trustworthy. The healer smiles and says that the Prota seems special since he doesn't see any signs of monstrosification in him. And to be more clear, he emphasizes that there is no sign of darkness in the Prota's essence, He just doesn't know why yet. Leonis, as the leader, introduces himself to the Prota, apologizing for Selena's rude behavior towards him. He explains that his group is still chasing the thieves who stole the royal vault, and given the residual magical essence left at the site, they suspect monsters are involved in some way. So, he asks the Prota to explain the whole situation. Sometime later, after Rude tells his entire story, Leonis says that he understands and now knows how the Prota survived the poisoning, as status nullification is a rare skill. The healer agrees, noting that it's the first time he's heard of such a skill, but now it all makes sense. Selena feels upset sitting next to the elf as she realizes this is how the Prota dissipated the abyss curse that was killing Alicia, and yet she helped him in that way. Rude says it's okay and that he understands her reaction. The healer approaches the Prota again and says that when he eats monster meat, he can replicate their abilities. However, on the other hand, when eating monster fish meat, he can't breathe underwater, which leaves him very thoughtful. Leonis also reflects as the Prota can absorb the abilities of monsters, but not their physical traits. The leader asks the elf if she has ever eaten a monster with the Prota. She thinks for a moment and remembers all the times she drooled watching him eat, but answers no, saying she never thought about it. Leonis resumes his thinking and says that perhaps someone other than the Prota, if they ate a monster and absorbed its essence, could also gain its abilities. Alicia, shocked by this thought, asks what he's talking about as eating monsters is considered a taboo. She questions what would happen if she ate one too and ended up transforming. The leader says that if that happened, they could simply use substitution to perhaps reverse the transformation. Everyone is surprised, including her, as she had never thought of that. The Prota goes up to him and says that this is not possible, as there are two destinies for those who eat monsters. Either the person turns into a monster, or they meet their end. The healer understands and comments that instead of directly transforming into a monster, the person might just die. Rude explains that the first time he ate a monster, he felt a surge of mana in his body, which caused him to completely lose control. Back then, he was driven by an intense desire for revenge against those who betrayed him, and that's how he was able to continue. Only now are the side effects of absorbing the mana starting to subside. Once again, the healer observes the Prota, saying that his body is adapting to that magical essence. Rude also explains that there was one time when substitution failed. Leonis looks a bit upset but says that he understands, emphasizing that there is still much to learn about mana. The healer agrees, saying that it's something not to be trifled with. Leonis watches Rude for a while in silence until he has an idea and asks the Prota if he could show his abilities. He begins to grab his sword and says that it's understandable, but there's still a lot about mana that they don't understand. And if they really want to understand it, they should talk using their swords. After all, they are adventurers. In the middle of the forest, noises are heard and even the unicorn rabbits stop due to the sound. Suddenly, they get startled as Leonis, along with his companion, is right in front of them. The unicorn rabbits just look at the two of them, already knowing what's about to happen. A little while later, the Prota had already prepared grilled unicorns with larvae and happily says it's time to eat. After trying it, he notes that it's delicious and automatically gains the ability Rabbit's Leap. Selena watches him and says that this is a bit unfair. She and the elf are drooling with hunger. Selena continues, saying that they need to use items or rest to recover magic. Alicia agrees with her and comments that it's quite convenient to recover mana by eating. After finishing the meal, the Prota snaps his fingers, excited, saying that he's ready now, as he's just recovered all his energy and thanks for the food. Leonis asks if he's really okay after eating all of that, but the Prota tells him not to worry and emphasizes that, in fact, he's better than ever. Suddenly, in the darkness, the healer opens a portal. That is the secret garden, and he transports them to a space filled with plant essence. This space doesn't allow interference and can only be accessed when the user permits. The healer informs them that they can enter now. Stepping inside, the Prota is impressed with what he sees, as there's a whole beautiful world on the other side. The healer says that no one will disturb them. He uses a flame skill and shows that the ground remained intact even after the impact, highlighting that they can go all out. Leonis removes his cloak and begins to release his aura, saying that it's time to start. He points his sword at the Prota, asking him not to hold back. The Prota hesitates for a moment and starts the battle using the skill Morpha Cut. Leonis laughs, saying that he's already started with a Morpha skill and is glad to see that Rude can really use monster abilities. He defends easily, but the Prota keeps advancing, this time using his skill Spiderweb. Leonis cuts through it as if it's nothing and asks if that's all the Prota has. But suddenly, Rude uses another skill and disappears from in front of him, leaving him a bit confused. Leonis looks at his hand and wonders if that was a paralyzing breath. Suddenly, the Prota appears behind the adventurer. Leonis turns around and defends the attack once again, saying that the Prota is still too young and that with such half-baked techniques, he won't even be able to scratch him. The two charge at each other and start exchanging several blows. As they exchange frantic attacks, Leonis tells the Prota that relying too much on his abilities is making his strikes shallow. Rude begins to feel pressured and asks if the paralysis didn't work. Leonis replies no, explaining that high-level adventurers like him have extremely high resistance. The adventurer delivers a slightly stronger blow, throwing the Prota off balance. Rude, realizing that he's about to take a direct hit, uses his stiffening skill. Even so, the impact is so strong that it sends him flying. Leonis explains that many monsters have resistance to negative statuses, and that the Prota can't rely too much on his skills. Rude hears this, but gets angry and uses another skill called Instant Step, charging with all his might at the opponent. Leonis watches and with a simple kick sends the Prota flying once again. On the ground, he gets frustrated. Leonis notices that the Prota is channeling his mana into his sword and charges again, this time using Rabbit's Leap. Leonis gets excited and comments that this is the skill the Prota got from eating earlier, emphasizing that he's really skilled. The Prota concentrates all his strength into an attack, creating a huge explosion, surprising even the healer, who was just watching. As the dust begins to settle, Leonis is standing, having dodged the attack as if it were nothing. He places his sword next to the Prota's face and says that it will be impossible to hit him with such spaced-out attacks. Moreover, although the monster skills are powerful, Rude's combat skills are still low. He highlights that the last attack might work well against giant monsters, but in a fight against another human, it would be hard to land such a blow. He extends his hand, helping Rude up. Rude grabs the hand of his hero, saying that he understood the lesson. Leonis asks the Prota if he's ever heard of that technique, showing his hand with a bit of energy. The adventurer explains that this is energy circulation through the body, which enhances physical abilities. As soon as Rude hears this, he immediately remembers what happened during his fight with the wise dragon and starts recalling the exact sensation. His hand begins to be enveloped by energy and he concentrates a little more. Leonis begins to smile, pleased with the result he's seeing as the Prota learns very quickly. Rude is now completely surrounded by the magic and, excited, pleads for them to fight again. Leonis is also very excited and laughs, shouting that, for him, there are only 2 times to pick a fight, during the day and at night. He tells the Prota to bring it on once more. The healer stands by, just laughing, seeing that the two of them are enjoying themselves. Sometime later at the camp, Alicia sees that the portal is opening again, and that the two are coming out. The Prota is tired and panting, saying it was to be expected from a rank S, as he couldn't land a single punch on his relative. Leonis pats him on the shoulder, saying that with his skills and versatility, the Prota managed to pressure him several times. Rude gets even more excited and thanks the adventurer, shouting with excitement as during their fight, Leonis pointed out his weaknesses and bad habits, meaning he was being trained. Leonis looks a little confused and just reflects on that. The big guy comments that it wasn't anything too serious and says it was just his leader being strange again. Leonis looks at him and says that he doesn't remember saying anything too out of the ordinary. The Prota thinks it's the first time he's heard that mountain of muscles speak. While they're talking, the healer calls Rude and asks him not to tell anyone about his monster-eating ability because if the royal capital finds out, he will be executed. This shocks him. The healer continues explaining that the closer they are to the capital, the greater the influence of the church, and for them, the Holy Scripture is an object of worship. In it, it's written that eating monsters is the greatest taboo of all. Rude tries to argue, saying that his ability nullifies the effects, but the healer gets closer and says that even so, going against the Holy Scriptures is already a sin. Selena enters the conversation and points out that those self-righteous clerics would never understand his side. The healer continues and asks if anyone other than the adventurers who participated in that dungeon knows this secret. The Prota says no, because it's a taboo. He explains that's exactly why he's kept the secret all this time and only told his companion Alicia. However, he remembers that Doem also knows, since he told him everything that happened, so the blacksmith could forge a sword. Immediately, they head back to Bologna and go to the dwarf's shop. When the dwarf hears the story, he says he doesn't care, and that whether it's a taboo or not, what others eat is none of his business. He tells Rude and the elf to relax, as he won't tell anyone, but suddenly the dwarf becomes serious and says that there's something more important. With a dense aura and extremely irritated, he says that Rude had ordered a sword from him, and now is saying that he doesn't need it anymore. The Prota realizes he made a mistake and immediately bows, apologizing for making the request. Doem looks at his masterpiece and says that he created a sword that wouldn't break, even with channeled mana, after completing such a difficult task. After finishing it, the Proto and the elf stand there, watching the dwarf, knowing that he's furious. She agrees, saying that's obvious. The blacksmith asks if Rude can do a favor for him, and since he feels guilty, Rude says he'll do anything. Doem turns around embarrassed and asks if the Proto can touch his sword. Rude is a bit confused but says he can't, explaining that the sword is cursed and drives anyone who strikes with it insane. The dwarf says that he didn't complain when the Proto disregarded his work, so he better listen to the request since he said anything. Moreover, the blacksmith says he's heard that the Proto can heal negative effects in others. Rude is shocked and screams that it's very dangerous because if the dwarf loses consciousness, substitution might not work. Doem says he doesn't care and that if it doesn't work, they can just cut him in half. Madness. But after thinking for a moment, Rude takes the sword, saying that since the blacksmith is so determined, Alicia gets worried and asks the dwarf if he's really serious. Doem says that in all his years as a blacksmith, he's never seen a weapon capable of absorbing magic or human energy like that, so the risk is worth it.